Fantastic. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, meeting is live right now. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the public hearings of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I am, as always, your friendly chairman, Kumar Barve. I'm not joined by, oh no, I am joined by Dana Stein, my vice chair, who was just really plowed under with a stomach bug that hit him really hard, but we're hoping to see you soon. But not until you're completely well, because we don't want to get it. So let me tell you what the order of the bills are going to be. The first bill is going to be House Bill 253, Delegate Grammer, then House Bill 501, a Montgomery Prince George's bi-county agency bill. House Bill 769 of the Montgomery County delegation, House Bill 794, Carroll County delegation, House Bill 1023, Delegate Holmes, House Bill 1058, Delegate Stewart, House Bill 1090, Delegate Stewart, House Bill 1073, Delegate Bridges, House Bill 1095, Delegate Bridges, House Bill 1201, Delegate Conaway, House Bill 12, wait a minute. This bill 1218, didn't we do that before? No, we didn't. Okay. Then House Bill 1218, Delegate Conaway, and the final bill, House Bill 1220, Delegate Conaway. So we will begin with Delegate Robin Grammer. Robin, welcome back to the committee. You've got 4 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'll take much less than that.
Well, that's good.
for the record, Delegate Robin Grammer here to present House Bill 253. House Bill 253 changes the definition of community association for the purposes of standing for local code violations in Baltimore County. It does so by adding nonprofits, changing the membership requirements, and removing the bonding requirement. You might recognize this bill. This is a bill I've worked on with Senator Sidnor. We've been working this bill for 5 years now. There is no cross file in the Senate. They're given a limit on the number of bills they can carry. So Senator Sidnor has asked me to carry this bill this year. This passed the full House in 2019, passed the full Senate in 2020, but never both houses in the same year. This bill is important because the nature of community associations has changed. And frequently do community associations require membership fees or can they afford a bond in 2021? The current law essentially prevents community associations from acting on serious offenses in Baltimore County. It is important to communities all over Baltimore County to have laws that allow us to act, not laws that prevent us from acting. This one's, it's really important for us in Baltimore County. We're seeing some really serious blight issues. And for that reason, we would ask for your support, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, we have 2 people who've signed up to testify in favor, so we'll listen to them first, and then we will entertain questions. For the record, nobody's signed up in opposition, and Francis Taylor and Wesley Stewart will each have 2 minutes. So, Mr. Taylor, you're up next. 2 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Well, thank you. My name is Francis Taylor. I'm president of the North Point Peninsula Council, Incorporated, located in southeastern Baltimore County. And I'm testifying today with regard to HB 253. The North Point Peninsula Council is celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. We're a Maryland nonprofit corporation. We have monthly meetings except in July and August. Our last few have been virtual. We feature a speaker who presents timely information to the community. We sponsor local Edgemere Green Society cleanup group. We host dumpster days, participate in local parades and the annual Defenders Day celebration. We do a Black Friday hike along the unfinished North Point Heritage Greenway Trail that parallels the Star Spangled Banner National Historic Trail. We donate to local volunteer fire department, community food pantry, Christmas drives, and other nonprofits. We built our community sign after nearly 20 years and continue to landscape, light, and replace the 3 flags when they become tattered. We provide holiday decoration and maintenance as needed. We also send a monthly newsletter to our members, elected officials, and others who have interest in our community. We have annual membership renewal requirements. We have dues. We have biannual elections for officers and the board. Voters are our members. We are currently partnering with Baltimore County and North Point Edgemere Rec Council on a community park at Trade Point Atlantic, and we're working with SHA on traffic and safety issues. I've gone to this litany to emphasize that a community association, more than filling out paperwork, paying an attorney to incorporate, and achieving nonprofit status. It's now more important than ever, given the ease of which false information can be spread through the community, to be able to unequivocally verify a group claiming to represent a community actually has broad interest in the community. Any attempt to remove or weaken the definition requirement for recognition as a community association should be opposed. In addition, other organizations should be clearly spelled as to who they may be. In summary, the bottom line is any attempt to remove or weaken requirements for recognition as a community association and identifying at least a reasonable and verifiable amount of support in the community should be opposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Wesley Stewart, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Wes Stewart from the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. We're here in support of the bill with amendments requested. We support the bill expanding community associations' ability to pursue public nuisance actions with the delegates bill, but we do have some concerns. We want to make sure the committee is aware there's a potential that this bill would undermine the Maryland Reduction of Lead Risk in Housing's lead risk reduction requirements, in particular around the rent escrow statute for Baltimore County. So we just want to raise that concern for the committee. But we also want to address an issue that's been there for many, many years in these public nuisance statutes, and that is they specifically exclude lead-based paint, lead paint hazards from the ability of community associations to pursue actions to address. So if there's a property in the community that has chipping, peeling paint, has structural defects that are causing paint to chip and flake, may have lead paint debris, lead dust that's affecting the community, the public nuisance statute in these jurisdictions, including Baltimore County, specifically precludes community associations from addressing that and trying to get injunctive relief. So we would ask that that provision be struck. It's on the last page of the bill, and it's regarding exclusions for conditions relating to lead paint. Ask that to be excluded. Baltimore County is the 3rd highest county historically for lead each year. 220 kids had EBLs in 2018 and 179 in 2019. So a county that still has to address the lead issues. The last piece we'd like to ask the committee to consider for amendment is the fact that the state of California, 10 jurisdictions in California successfully sued the lead paint companies, producing $305 million in lead paint remediations available for 10 cities and counties. We would ask for an amendment for the committee to consider to also strike the provision again on the lead paint, which also sets up a potential obstruction for the jurisdiction in the community to ever pursue actions against the paint company to address lead. So the time is ripe at this point to look at that as an option. That's what California pursued, a public nuisance doctrine. And we'd last ask for that amendment to actually exclude that provision and have it struck. So it's no longer a factor precluding community associations and jurisdictions.
Okay.
So for those reasons, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We support with amendment.
We have a question from Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question is this a local Baltimore County bill or is this a statewide bill?
It's a Baltimore County bill.
And does it have a letter of support from a delegation?
I believe they did send it over, yes. I don't have one personally, but I can get that.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, Delegate Terraza.
Yeah, Mr. Taylor, are you, I guess I was a little confused by your testimony. Are you opposed for the most part to this bill?
We are not opposed to the bill, but we are concerned that any weakening of the verification that a community association is actually supported by that community and not just a few individuals who have come together and hired an attorney, became an incorporation and a nonprofit following their own agenda is not addressed. And we think by having dues, by having membership requirements is a good way, as it has been in the past, to verify that any group does have the support of the community and acting in the best interest of the community.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Delegate Grammer, do you support these amendments that have been offered by these 2 witnesses?
I have not seen them. You can
can get back to it.
I'll speak to the second first. So this, like I said, this is originally Senator Sidnor's bill. These articles were drafted many years ago, and I think they purposefully excluded lead paint. I'm not opposed to raising the issue, but I think my gut feeling is to deal with this bill and actually get it passed, since we've been working on it for 5 years. But I'm happy to talk about lead paint. I am familiar with Fran's situation, that he is one of my constituents. And speaking to his issues, I think that there could be concerns with, and maybe Fran can comment on this after me, but someone disagrees with what your community association's doing, so they break off and they form their own group, and then they claim to, have a stake or standing that could be just because they disagree with what you're doing.
Delegate Grammer, let me ask a more baseline question. The bill that you've introduced without the amendments, is that the form in which it has passed the House of Delegates?
Yes, it passed the full Senate in this form as well.
Okay. Delegate Ruth has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to clarify, Delegate Grammer, the part about lead paint that was referred to, that's not part of your bill, that's the existing law, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the sponsor or any of the witnesses who testified? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the public hearing on House Bill 253. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Proceed to House Bill 501, the Montgomery County and Prince George's County delegations. Who's here to testify on behalf of this bill?
I think that would be me, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Montgomery County Delegation Member Marvin Holmes.
I think it, or maybe it's not.
It's
Delegate Holmes, you're up for 501.
Okay.
okay. It's a bi-county bill.
It's bi-county.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The bill requires a respondent to pay a $5 fee, late fee, for a financial disclosure statement that is filed late if the respondent is required to file a financial, if he's required to file a financial disclosure statement. The total amount that the respondent has to pay is not to exceed $500. And this was a bill that was suggested by WSSC for their public ethics laws. That's it.
Well, Guy Andes is here, I think. So Guy,
Wonderful.
are you here?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Guy Andes, Government Affairs Manager for WSSC Water, here to ask your support for House Bill 501. This bill essentially will allow our Board of Ethics to set up a fee structure similar to the Maryland State Ethics Commission and impose a $5 fee for each day, not to exceed $500 to an employee who's required to file a financial disclosure and does not do so in a timely manner. As a bi-county state agency, our request is to adopt this structure that mirrors the one at the state, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, anybody got any questions about this bill? Well, seeing none, that ends the public hearing on House Bill 501.
Thank you, sir. Stay safe.
Pardon me?
Oh,
I said stay safe. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. Let's go to House Bill 769, the Montgomery County delegation. And I assume, Al, that's why you're here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and esteemed members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, Al Carr here on behalf of the Montgomery County delegation on House Bill 769. Under this bill, our housing agency committees are deemed public bodies under the Open Meetings Act. It codifies a November 2nd, 2020 Open Meetings Compliance Board opinion. It has the unanimous support of the Montgomery County delegation, and I'd ask for your favorable report.
Okay. Also, Peggy Dennis is here to testify in favor of the bill. Peggy, you around?
we did not see her in the waiting room.
Okay, nobody signed up in opposition. Any questions on this local bill? Seeing none, Al, you're free to go. Take care. Okay, next is House Bill 794, the Carroll County delegation. Who's presenting for that bill? Anybody here from the Carroll County delegation?
You know, we did not hear back from the delegation on that. Go on and I'll try to call them and see for them to come back.
Okay, then let's go to House Bill 1023, Delegate Home.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 1023, Mr. Chair and ladies and gentlemen of the committee, is a bill that is bringing us into the current situation and to the 21st century. More specifically, this bill allows condominiums, homeowners associations, and cooperatives, and all three of those, as you all know by now, are referred to as common ownership communities. This bill allows all of the common ownership communities to be able to conduct virtual meetings. There has been some concern throughout the common ownership communities throughout the state where they are in confusion about what they can and cannot do in terms of virtual meetings and how their elections take place, et cetera. And because I have received so many questions relevant to this across the state, it was suggested, Mr. Chair, that some legislation be put together to provide guidance to all of the common ownership communities throughout the state. And that's what this bill does. And I think that after you hear from those who have provided testimony, then you have additional information on how the bill allows everyone to move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, also signed up in favor, although favorable with amendments, is Julie Domowski. Julie, are you with us?
I am, Mr. Chair.
There you are.
I am
Okay.
here. Commission.
2 minutes, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Julie Domowski. I am here on behalf of the CAI Maryland Legislative Action Committee in favor of House Bill 1023. As Delegate Holmes had stated, we have had a lot of inquiries from community associations, condominiums, homeowners associations, cooperatives as to whether or not they can conduct virtual meetings. As a result of the pandemic, their hands are tied with respect to conducting their business, holding elections, adopting budgets, taking care of contracts. They have to have meetings. And just as this body has had to adapt, they need to adapt as well. And they need to be brought into, you know, the here and now with how business is being conducted, and that's virtually. We've had some clients, I'm an attorney that practices in this area. We've had some clients who have gone ahead and conducted their business by virtual meeting because of the pandemic restrictions. They've had no choice. And it's amazing to me, I've attended these meetings. The participation numbers are staggering. This is the easiest, most efficient way to have members come into the meeting, join the meeting, be heard in the meeting. It is really a very positive, we were very concerned about it, but it's a positive benefit. It also has helped with scheduling. They now don't have to run around and look for a large room to rent. There's no rental of chairs and tables and payment of any fees. They're professionals, believe it or not, are cheaper because they come in and come out and there isn't any travel. So generally, we found it to be very positive. And through this bill, we want to give condominiums, homeowners associations, and co-ops the ability and the flexibility to use virtual meetings. We need this legislation like yesterday. That's why we're asking our amendment that it be an emergency bill or effective date prior to October 1st. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the sponsor or the witness?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Marvin, you want to ask yourself a question?
I would, yes, Mr. Delegate Holmes, are you the most wonderful guy in the world? Yes, I am. Thank you very much. I was just going to say, Mr. Chair, that I would accept this as a friendly amendment.
Okay. Good to know, as Laura Lodge would say. All right, any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 1023. Let's proceed to House Bill 1058. Delegate Stewart.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Shoemaker is there if you want to go back to the Carroll County bill.
Oh, yeah, sure. Vaughn, if you don't mind, we'll take the Carroll County bill next. Delegate Shoemaker, welcome back to the Environment and Transportation Committee.
It's always good to be in the Environment and Transportation Committee, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Haven Shoemaker on House Bill 794. It's a local bill, obviously, that pertains to our sheriff's salary. Basically, what it would do is that it would raise the salary of the sheriff coming into office after the 2022 election cycle in 2 increments. First being he or she would go from 110 to 125 in year 1, and then the following year it would go from 125 to 140, which would put the Carroll County Sheriff on a par with surrounding jurisdictions like Frederick County and Harford County. And our sheriff does over 70% of the policing, or is responsible for 70% of the policing in our county, in addition to running our detention center and providing courthouse security and all those other things that sheriffs typically do. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, no one has signed up against the bill. Are there any questions for Delegate Shoemaker on this local bill? Okay, seeing none, you're free to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, now we'll get to House Bill 1058, Delegate Stewart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Delegate Vaughn Stewart. This is HB 1058, the Integrity in High Office Act. So as everyone knows, Maryland has been plagued by a number of ethics scandals in recent years, historically as well, but it seems like it's intensified in the last 5 years or so. We all remember Healthy Holly and the series of scandals. We all remember that last year, the Washington Monthly published a report that raised concerns that Governor Hogan had been steering taxpayer dollars to transportation projects that would increase the value of his own real estate holdings. And these incidents and others have shown a light on a number of inadequacies of a few parts of our ethics law. So few of you will probably remember I had a similar bill last session. We couldn't quite get it over the finish line in an amended version before the pandemic came and shortened our session, but I worked with a number of different folks over the interim to craft this new version of the bill, and I just want to run through the 4 principal parts of what it does. So first, if an official takes an action that has a material impact on them or a person whose interests are attributable to them, they've got to disclose it to not only the State Ethics Commission, but also the Joint Ethics Committee. And this provides some degree of confidentiality, and then it leaves it up to the ethics officials to decide what action to take when they get that information. Secondly, under current law, the State Ethics Commission basically can authorize people to participate.
You can let HB 1090 people in. I let in Greg County.
So current law allows public officials to engage in actions that they have if they have financial interests, notwithstanding that conflict, and those exceptions are generally confidential. But under the bill, if the commission enters into a memorandum of understanding, MOU, or offers advice to an official, the commission would have to share that information about the MOU or the advice with the Joint Ethics Commission. So an example is like if a legislator is employed at Walmart and they've got to vote on a bill that would ban plastic bags at Walmart, the Ethics Commission could authorize an exception to the legislator since, it's understood the bill wouldn't materially impact their salary as a cashier. But under the bill, the commission would have to notify the Joint Ethics Committee that they granted that exception and then provide documentation with what they told the legislator about that conflict. Third, the bill would enhance the disclosure requirements for public officials in a number of ways. So if an official discloses the name of a business that they have an interest in or relationship with, the bill would require he or she to also include any trade names or alternative name that the business goes by. Similarly, the official would be required to disclose any contractual relationship with a quasi-governmental entity like UMS. And officials would also have to disclose any and all businesses that the filer has a 10% or greater interest in, regardless of how those interests are held. That gets to the issue of sort of subsidiary companies, basically. And then lastly, and maybe least importantly, but the bill expands the list of state officials that get the 2-hour online ethics training on all these disclosure rules. And so under the bill would also apply to lower profile elected officials like county sheriffs and register of wills, as well as executive branch state officials who currently don't get the training that we, the legislative branch, get. The disclosure rules can be really complicated. They're not always intuitive. So we just want to make sure that elected officials are trained so that they can avoid potential conflicts. So, in conclusion, recent scandals have revealed a number of gaps in our ethics laws. I think we should be aggressive in addressing the gaps, no matter the political party of the culprit. HB 1058, the Integrity in High Office Act, would help ensure elected officials in Maryland are acting in Maryland's interests rather than their own. I urge favorable report.
Well, before I get to questions, I think it's fair to say for the record also that the recent experience of the state of Maryland has shown that our ethics laws actually do a pretty good job of cracking down on people who have made violations. That's not to say that we shouldn't improve things, but I don't want to denigrate the system that we have in place right now. I haven't read your bill yet, Delegate Stewart, but you said something that piqued my interest, and maybe I misheard you. Would your bill, right now, we legislators have to have to talk to the ethics attorney here, and we're able to ask her, in this case it's a woman, but we're able to ask her opinion about certain things, or we're able to write asking for an opinion, and that exchange of information is seen as being confidential. Does your bill do anything to make a communication that I or somebody else would make with the Ethics Council not confidential?
No, not at all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to clarify this issue. No, and that would never be my intention. I think those sorts of communications should be confidential. It's very important to be able to speak candidly with ethics officials to make sure that you're abiding by the rules. So no state in the union would ever obviate that. What the bill simply says is that once you've basically come to an agreement with the Ethics Commission that you do have a conflict, and they allow you to nevertheless participate in a government action that you're conflicted on, they will generally provide you with an MOU or some sort of formal or informal written advice about how you should proceed with your conflict. So what the bill says is rather that information stay housed in the State Ethics Commission, the commission would have to disclose it to the Joint Ethics Committee. Now, obviously, it's still confidential within the Joint Ethics Committee. The reason this came to light is that the State Ethics Commission, as I'm sure some folks remember, entered into an MOU with Governor Hogan surrounding some of his budget decision-making regarding his real estate holdings. And no one really else outside of the State Ethics Commission was aware that this was happening throughout, state government otherwise. And so the reason we've crafted the bill in this way is to still maintain confidentiality in that situation, but to also to clue the Joint Ethics Committee in, so they're not on a completely different page than the commission.
has actually given us written testimony against the bill. Have you read their testimony, and what response do you have to them?
I have. So they don't like the bill. I think mostly just because of the wording rather than actually what the bill does. is very protective over whether or not it has to comply with the PIA, with the Public Information Act. This bill would not change anything regarding that, but I think it's worried about the language that I use in the bill that calls them a quasi-governmental entity. So in their opposition testimony, they basically say they don't want to be included explicitly, and they also just object to being called a quasi-governmental entity. They maintain that they're completely private. And this is, certainly an important debate, and you could go both ways. I would just note that Maryland's highest court has called in recent years, quote unquote, an instrumentality of the state. Its board is appointed by the governor. It's heavily funded by the state. The state has just historically controlled a number of its actions. So I think that the argument that they make in the testimony that they're not quasi-governmental is pretty weak.
Okay, so let me just see if I understand this correctly. I ask the Ethics Council, I tell them what I do for a living. And I ask the Ethics Council whether or not I have a conflict of interest for a bill having to do with the environment, let's say, since I work for an environmental hazardous waste disposal company. And I personally don't think I have a conflict of interest, but I just kind of want to find out. So I ask her, and she gets back to me and says, I don't think you have a conflict of interest. Would that be interpreted as an example of the ethics council telling me that I can vote in spite of what might be
No.
Okay, what if she said you might have a conflict of interest, but it's a public policy? I mean, teachers who serve in the legislature vote for and against legislation having to do with education, and it might, bear upon their salary or stuff like that, but that's not seen as a conflict of interest.
No, you'll know if DIA or the Ethics Commission, if they inform you that you have a conflict of interest, then therefore you have to be granted an exception to participate. You will know. That is different than them saying, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, or maybe. No, for the instances that I'm talking about, the Ethics Commission determines that you 100% have a conflict, and the only way that you're going to be able to participate is if you enter into an MOU or some sort of agreement. Now, this often doesn't happen for legislators, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because for us, it's easy to extricate ourselves from decisions. We can just not vote. We can just mark excused. So it's easy for us to get out of stuff. The reason it gets tricky with executive branch officials is because the governor can't really extricate himself from the budget process. Just because he has business conflicts in the budget, he can't just walk away and say, well, I'm not going to fulfill my constitutional duty of creating the budget because I have conflicts. So therefore, in that situation, he had to enter into an MOU or, basically some formal advice with the State Ethics Commission, where they said, you absolutely have a conflict. Everyone knows you have an obvious conflict of interest here. However, you have to still fulfill your constitutional duty. So we're going to enter into this agreement with you about how you should try to do things to minimize the conflict that you're going to have to try to minimize. That document would, under our bill, have to be shared with the Joint Ethics Committee.
Okay, and final question from me before I recognize Delegate Healy. This bill goes into effect when?
I believe it's October 1.
Of this year?
Yes.
Okay, Delegate Healy has a question.
Yeah, my question is about the separation of powers between the different branches of government and having everybody lumped in together. Right now, we have our own ethics process. We have the committee, we have the council. To have the State Ethics Commission involved in our operations, it seems to me like that's like a step that moves us closer to some kind of conflict.
Well, Delegate Healy, I appreciate the question. So the State Ethics Commission already governs a lot of our actions. The Joint Ethics Committee is not the only body that can punish us. We already have to report various things and make various disclosures to the State Ethics Commission. They already govern our behavior in a number of ways. They have enforcement ability, they have interpretive ability. So they're already all up in the legislature's business. And this bill doesn't really do anything to expand that scope. The Joint Ethics Committee is kind of its own beast, and it has, basically.
Okay, let me ask you another question. Can this, under your legislation, does this, the joint, not the committee of the legislature, but the commission, can they act preemptively to say that, for example, because my husband's retired military and we do a tax break for military and their families, retirees. Okay, so if we did that, and could they just say on their own without me asking them that I shouldn't vote on that?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think that they could, but whether they can or not, and we could certainly ask, DEA that question. I don't think so, but also this bill doesn't really address that issue at all. It wouldn't change the status quo on that point.
The question is, can they take the initiative to tell legislators when they have a conflict or not?
I don't believe so.
I mean, it's one thing if we go and we ask DEA and she says, that's not a conflict, and she gives us reasons why it's not, because we're not being treated individually different from the rest of society, but we might belong to a group of people that is getting a benefit, but no more than anybody else in that group. That's the same thing that covers teachers and all kinds of people, because we are a citizen legislature. And if we get that advice from DEA, our council, and we don't go any further with it. We take that as being given permission to go forward without any conflict. Do we have any obligation under your legislation to also go to the commission and ask them as well?
No.
Okay.
No, my bill doesn't touch that process whatsoever.
So when do we ask the commission for permission?
Under the bill?
Under your bill?
We don't really ever ask anyone for permission. I mean, the process where you have conversations with DEA about conflicts, and you have annual meetings with DEA, and she provides you informal or formal confidential advice, that doesn't change under the bill.
Okay, we'll have to talk more about it. I'm trying to understand the bill better. Thank you.
Delegate Learman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to clarify. So how I read this bill, it's much more about, there's a difference between legislators and full-time elected representatives, right? So we are full-time elected government officials, our governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and comptroller, right? And those are full-time positions. And the General Assembly is very different because we are part-time positions, right, Delegate Stewart? Okay.
Correct. And the ethics code already treats us differently.
Right, it already treats us differently. So my understanding in this bill is the conflict of interest section of it. It really pertains to circumstances when there wouldn't be a quorum because, like, for instance, at the Board of Public Works, right? If both the comptroller and the governor had conflicts of something that was coming up for a vote, they would have to declare those conflicts. There would have to be they would have to tell the Ethics Commission about those conflicts. They would go to the Ethics Commission, the Ethics Commission would tell them, and then they would also send that MOU to the Joint Ethics Committee. Is that correct?
That's correct. So for the statewide public officials,
right,
they cannot just decline to vote as a way to avoid conflicts. And so that's why we need this provision.
And I just think that's really important to clarify that this is about those elected officials who can't not vote, right? Like if I can't vote because I have a conflict, there's still a quorum, right? I mean, our whole committee could be, there'd still be a quorum on the House floor. But at the BPW, or if the Attorney General needs to do something, they could easily lose a quorum or not be able to act and fulfill their duties. And so my understanding at least, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that this really just clarifies that information needs to be shared not just with the State Ethics Commission, but also with the Joint Ethics Committee, which is still confidential, but at least it'll be two places, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think I understand that provision. I haven't read your bill yet, but does your bill refer to formation of quorums?
There is a part that includes quorum, that basically, other than, if the conflict, if you try to extricate yourself from the conflict and you couldn't do so without eliminating a quorum, then that is in the bill.
Why do we need to include the University of Maryland then?
Well, that's a separate part of the bill. Sorry, it gets a little confusing. So the UMS provision is purely, it has nothing to do, the UMS provision has nothing to do with what we've been talking about in the hearing thus far, or have been focusing on the hearing thus far regarding, notifying the state ethics committee about conflicts. The UMS provision is very simple, which is that in the disclosures that everyone currently makes, they have to disclose relationships they have with governmental entities. So for example, if I get income from Montgomery County, or I get income from some other instrumentality of the state, I have to disclose that. We all have to disclose that on our ethics forms now. All public officials do. This bill, the UMS provision would simply expand that to quasi-governmental entities, because we also, if I have contracts set up with UMS for textbooks or for any other instrumentality of the state, it's good government basically for the State Ethics Commission to also be aware of those potential conflicts with both governmental and, under the bill, quasi-governmental entities.
Okay, any other questions for the sponsor? No one else has signed up to testify, although there is written testimony in favor and against. Okay, if there are no further questions, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 1058. We will proceed to House Bill 1090, also Delegate Stewart.
Yes, I think this one will be a little bit less dry. So thank you all again. For the record, Delegate Vaughn Stewart. This is HB 1090, the Mixed Income Housing Act. So our committee actually had a great discussion just last week about mixed income housing in response to Delegate Washington's legislation. I think this is a nice sort of companion bill, and hopefully will also engender a good dialogue. So there's really no getting around it. Maryland doesn't have enough supply of affordable housing. That's the reality. This committee has heard that refrain over and over, but just last week, DHCD really spelled it out for us. They released a report, I'm sure some of you all saw it already, called the Maryland Housing Needs Assessment. It was authored by the University of Maryland's National Center for Smart Growth. And their conclusion was that we face a shortage of more than 100,000 rental units, including at least 85,000 affordable units. And the report also had a suggestion for us, the General Assembly. They recommended that we set up a dedicated funding source for the construction of new housing. And that's exactly what HB 1090 does. Maryland currently spends a paltry sum from the state level on the construction of housing. So in fiscal year 2019, for example, the Maryland Housing Trust Fund, which is the largest of our housing funds, received only $2 million. And because it costs at least $250,000 to build a new unit of rental housing, the fund currently receives enough money per year to build a grand total of 8 new rental units. Eight. And we need 100,000. The fund has only received $50 million since 1992. I was born, by the way, Mr. Chairman, in 1992. And the District of Columbia, a jurisdiction just to our south and that's 1/10 of our size, spent twice that much, 100 million, just last year. HB 1090 would allow jurisdictions to apply, local jurisdictions of counties and Baltimore City, to apply for funding to develop mixed income housing, as long as 70% of the units in the project are the reserve for folks making less than 3/4 of the area median income. The bill would be a win for everybody. Right now, almost a quarter of Marylanders pay more than half of their income in rent, which is the second worst rate in the country. And the bill would help these individuals find housing they can actually afford. And of course, the benefits extend from there, because the construction of the projects would stimulate the economy, they would provide jobs, and local small businesses would benefit from a dense group of consumers with more disposable income in the housing. So right now, there's only about 34 affordable and accessible units for every 100 low-income renters in the state. And so this bill, depending on exactly how we work out the revenue source, would generate several million more dollars. And that's where I'm going to turn to sort of some amendment discussion. With the amendments we're going to make to the original bill, we're stripping the bill of the first revenue source that we had contemplated, which is the increase in the real estate transfer tax. That engendered a lot of opposition from both the builders and the realtors. I've had lengthy discussion with them over the last 2 years on this bill, but especially in the last week or two. We're going to take that out. And I think I'm going to be able to come to the table. They're both now favorable with amendments now that I've taken that out. And we're looking at some other funding sources, including a surcharge on recordable instruments of $50. Last year it was $75. We dropped it down to $50 in order to make it more reasonable for folks. So basically, like when you buy a house, for example, you'd have to pay an extra $50 and it would go into this fund. The fund that we're using is called the Partnership for Rental Housing, which is a currently existing fund within DHCD's purview that generates funding to the counties. But I've been able to speak with the builders, the realtors. I've also talked to the judiciary and the land title folks. Everybody who signed up in opposition, I've talked to. And Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to report, because I know you're interested in affordable housing construction. I'm happy to report that I think we're pretty close to a deal. And so I think that over the next few days and week, I'm going to try to bring everyone together, maybe in one big Zoom meeting. It's just a matter of figuring out the funding. I think we're close to doing it. And once we do it, I think this committee will have a product that we can all be proud of, which is a new dedicated funding source to provide housing and dignity for thousands of Marylanders.
So I guess that means that the written testimony from the Land Title Association and the MSBA Real Property section and the Maryland, well, I don't know about you didn't refer to the judiciary, but I assume that those written unfavorable testimonies drop away. Is that what you're saying?
I've spoken with all of them. I wouldn't necessarily say they drop away, because I don't think that they love the surcharge idea either. But I've spoken with them. They're willing to work with me to come up with a slate. The realtors actually, and I think Mr. Castelli is joining us this afternoon.
Okay.
They've come up with another funding source we could use. And I think right now what we're planning to do is kind of have a bit of a Frankenstein approach, use a little bit of funding from a couple of different places that in the aggregate dramatically increase the amount of money we're spending. So
okay.
Right now, I think they're still unfavorable, Mr. Chairman. The realtors and the builders are both favorable with amendments. I think those other groups are technically still unfavorable, but they're all working with me. And I think that we're going to get everybody on the same page.
Okay. Why is the Maryland judiciary unfavorable?
Well, it's tricky. They actually use a current portion of the current surcharge that we do on instruments. A very small percentage of it actually goes to the IT in the judiciary. It's wild. I mean, actually, Bill Castelli with the realtors pointed out that, Marylanders, when they go buy a home, for example, on these instruments, they pay all sorts of fees, but virtually none of them actually go back into housing. Not that the judiciary doesn't need updated IT equipment. All these projects are worthwhile, but they rely on that. And so they are hesitant for us to increase the surcharge even more, because I think they were hoping to come back to us, and what they told me, or what they say in the testimony, fiscal year 2023, they wanted to come back and request an increase for their purposes. So they're worried that if we increase it now for my purposes, we'll be less willing in 2 years to come back and give them more money for their IT infrastructure. So it's just, Mr. Chairman, anytime you want to try to raise money, you're always going to, people are always going to be opposed in one way or another, but we're trying to sort of spread the pain out so that no one feels it too much. And if we have to kick a couple of dollars over to the judiciary for them to drop their opposition, it sounds like that may be something they're willing to do as well. So anyway, it's a grand compromise that I'm brewing up, Mr. Chairman. I've been very busy, but I think that you'll be pleased with it at the end of the day.
Okay, well, a number of people have signed up in favor. So let's go through them, and then I'll entertain questions for you again, delegate, and the other witnesses. So there's Tanika Richardson, Kristen Greco, Legal Aid, who I assume is, Greg Countess, I guess, and then Lori Graff, who has signed up favorable with amendments. So let's start with Tanika Richardson. Tanika?
Yes. Hello?
Hi, I can hear you.
You can hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, and I can see you too.
You see me? Okay. Thanks for having me. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Tanika. I'm a housing policy fellow at the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. Here at MedStep, we believe that every Marylander should be able to achieve their full potential in a healthy economy that offers a widely shared rise standard of living. You've already heard the delegate already touch on the needs assessment that was just released, so I'm not going to go over that. Just want to dive into some additional data. Currently, in order to afford a market 2-bedroom in Maryland of about $1,500 a month, a family needs to earn about more than 2.5 times the state minimum wage, which is about $29 per hour. Raising the minimum wage is part of the equation. However, creating a greater supply of low to moderate price rental homes is also essential. New investments in well-designed social housing could also improve high poverty neighborhoods and take steps to address the ongoing harm of Maryland's history of housing segregation. Putting unused land to productive use, building attractive new housing, and bringing new residents to a community can invite other private investments and improvements. Strong evidence shows that investing in affordable housing pays off in the long term by helping children and families stay healthy and can ultimately reduce healthcare costs. Maryland already had a housing crisis before the pandemic. However, we have a chance to build back better. House Bill 1090 would expand Maryland's stock of affordable housing, which will strengthen our state's economy. As such, the MAD staff urges a favorable report from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanika. Next, Kristen Greco. Kristen? Kristen? Okay, we'll go to Greg Countess, and hopefully Kristen will pop up. Greg, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to be back, and hello, members of the committee. First of all, thank you to Delegate Stewart for introducing this bill and for inviting Maryland Legal Aid to testify. My written testimony is rather long. I don't know how much I can add to that here orally. However, I will attempt to make these few points. One, when Maryland Legal Aid conducted a survey of our clients and we asked them what were their most pressing needs, the number one issue was affordable housing. And that's something that the University of Maryland study, as well as consolidated plans of all the large jurisdictions, as well as the state of Maryland, so to detail the need for that sort of housing. The second point is that this bill, in attempting to destroy the sort of economic stratification that there is between persons who are poor and those who are middle class, helps to alleviate harms not only of the past, but those that also maintain themselves here now, currently. As the previous speaker said, these sort of housing communities are healthy. Housing does equal health and assistance. Also for young kids, there was a study done by Harvard that showed, in fact, that placing young children in places where there is not this economic stratification there, or where there's access to food and safety and to jobs, works as an economic benefit for those kids and thus for the rest of the community. And for those reasons, as well as others, I'd urge a favorable report on House Bill 1090.
Okay, thank you very much. Lori Graff, I see Lori here. You're favorable with amendments. Welcome back to the committee.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for letting me take the time to testify on House Bill 1090. I think the delegate did a good conversation, or a good starting point for our conversations we've had over the last several days, as well as several years on this issue. And we appreciate the sponsor working with us. We believe that there is a problem. Obviously, we know there's a problem. Affordable housing is a huge issue in this state. So is housing affordability. So we have a lot of concerns about increasing the transfer tax, as well as we do have some concerns about the recordation tax as well, the recordation fees. There's housing affordability is also an issue, and we don't want to make housing more expensive. And when we keep tracking on these fees, it becomes a little bit problematic. Our national association has a figure that they throw out that for every $1,000 you add on to the price of a house, 2,881 Marylanders are just priced out of the market completely. So we don't want to exacerbate the problem by just making housing more expensive. So for those reasons, we want to be part of the solution. And I love being part of the grand compromise, as the delegate mentioned. And we're happy to continue to work on this bill. We do believe in the concept of it, and we'd like to see it move forward in some form. We just need to work on the funding mechanism. So thank you.
Thank you. Is Kristen Greco around before I go to the opponents? Kristen Greco?
I don't see her. She's with Montgomery County HOC. She must have not made it in.
Okay. In that case, I do have a question from, let me make sure that I've gotten everybody who wanted to testify. Yeah, I did. So Delegate Otto has the first question. Charles, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go for it.
For the sponsor, Delegate Could you elaborate on the requirements for prevailing wage and things like that that are included in this bill?
Yeah, thank you, Delegate Otto. So there are a number of restrictions we put on the funding mechanism. So basically how it would work is that the counties would apply for funding from DHCD for projects that are already being built. And, you know, we're not trying to do anything crazy here. You know, the reason that we've been working with Montgomery County HOC, the reason that County Executive Oshevsky in Baltimore County submitted favorable testimony here is that there are a lot of our counties are already doing this work with the parameters that we've put in place. And so in some cases, we basically put that when considering which projects to approve money for, DHCD should consider a number of factors, because obviously we want housing built, but we want it to be good housing. We want it to be good quality. We want workers to be paid fair wages when they build it. We want it to be built sustainably, ideally, to the extent possible in terms of, you know, environmental climate impact. And then we also have some language in there about, if it's possible, we'd like to locate the housing near transit and near job opportunities. Obviously, this state and this country has a really sordid history of locating, whether it's affordable housing or public housing or mixed income housing, too far away from job centers and opportunity. So there are basically a number of things that DHCD is required to consider when deciding which applications to approve and which ones they don't. Now, it's possible that we're too restrictive. In the event we're too restrictive and there are no projects that meet this, the money just flows automatically into other existing housing funds. So housing is going to get built either way, but that's how the program works.
Well, the fiscal note indicates the DHCD must deny an application that does not include prevailing wage and other thing requirements.
Yeah, that's a requirement.
Suggestion or any decisions that they can make otherwise.
Yeah, the prevailing wage piece is a requirement. It's one of the few. The other stuff is sort of things DHCD should consider, but the prevailing wage, we feel strongly that, you know, that the workers should be paid a prevailing wage when they build the housing if the taxpayers are going to fund it.
I see there's an element too about repurposing older infrastructure. If you could make some comments on that, that sounds favorable to me. I'm all for that.
Yeah. Well, we want to provide maximum flexibility to the counties. That's what that provision is about. And we've heard, you know, in talking to a variety of counties over the last couple of years, a few county officials have told me, and not just from my own county, have told me, hey, we're not building any new housing right now. It's too expensive, but we have had some success and some conversations about retrofitting either existing housing, you know, existing private housing we want to bring in and repurpose, or existing commercial buildings. And we know, I think we heard legislation from Valentino Smith just last week that, you know, you got a lot of vacant commercial buildings that could even get worse with the pandemic. And so some counties are being really creative in repurposing that for housing. And we just don't want to be too restrictive when it comes to those uses. And so it basically says in the bill that if whether the county is going to build something new, or they're going to repurpose existing residential, or whether they're going to repurpose existing commercial, we want to have, we want to be able to fund that.
Thank you.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. Some of my questions actually have been answered just recently. So this is definitely for new construction, correct?
It's for new construction, but it's also, as I just mentioned, so it could be renovations or conversions as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, there was nothing there before and now there's stuff now. It can also be conversions of commercial or residential into this use.
Okay, and then these would only be built, constructed, reconstructed by, say, a housing authority or a government entity. Is that correct?
Not exclusively. There are some instances we're not really changing the program in terms of in that aspect of it. So currently, the Partnership for Rental Housing Program generally provides funding to authorities and to counties to spend the money. But there are also provisions in the current program that if you're building a housing project, for example, for those with disabilities, you can use nonprofit, but like private sector affordable housing developers for that. So it's not exclusively public, the current program, but we're not changing that part of the program.
Okay, because in the bill, it said that it had to be remain in the in public ownership. And that's why I asked that question.
Right. So in the sort of initial round of funding for the non-disability programs or whatever, one of the requirements is that if the HOCs and the housing authorities in the counties already do this, but that they basically they plan for the building to remain in public hands. They don't plan to sell it to a private entity down the road.
Okay. The two other questions that I have has to do with the density clause that you have in here. And then the other question is, how did you arrive at the 50 to 75% of the units would have to be, I thought I heard you say 3/4 of the AMI. So,
Yeah.
So the first one, whichever order you want to take it, the 50 to 75% of units at 3/4 of the AMI, and then the concern about density and what is, scrolling through, I don't remember seeing a definition of high density, but I did see that it had to be high density.
Well, I'll take your second one first, because I actually thought about you when I was reading the fiscal note because of some of the comments you made that I think were on point about concentration of poverty to Delegate Washington. Right now, a lot of our housing programs on the state level in Maryland target projects that are entirely for the very poorest Marylanders. Okay, that's the reality, is that most of our dollars, and they're very few, as I said, we could fully fund 8 units a year from our housing trust fund, which is, to me, is just mind blowing. Those units and the entire buildings have to be completely geared under current Maryland law to a 100% complex of low income residents. I think that's bad policy. I think by having an income mix, you still provide housing for folks who need it, but you also are, you're not concentrating poverty, you're not concentrating, crime or whatever in one area, right? So I changed the income thresholds to basically try to allow projects to apply for the funding if they're mixed income projects rather than just projects for the very poor, which, by the way, are extremely difficult to finance, and so they're very few and far between anyway. The way I came up with the 70% have to be at 75% of the area median income is honestly just looking at a bunch of other jurisdictions for how they define mixed income. And I forget the exact state that I used, but I looked at a range of states because it's a Goldilocks situation, right? You don't want to have so many market rate units that you're not providing enough housing for folks who need it the most. But at the same time, you want to provide enough units in there that are market or for middle class folks to allow some cross subsidization of the rents, and also just provide that sort of mixed income effect that we're looking for. So I can't answer precisely how I divine those percentages. I mean, we could probably move them around a little bit. They're not set in any sort of scrolls, anywhere that I'm aware, but that's just generally kind of the range of jurisdictions to look at when they're trying to find this kind of Goldilocks approach. Now, in terms of the density piece, I think that if I remember correctly, one of the factors that DHCD is supposed to look at is that these basically should be located in high density areas. That just goes to basically sprawl. We want to, when possible, put these buildings near transit, near existing jobs, near current well-populated areas. What we don't want is to increase sprawl by locating a 6-story mixed income housing project out in agricultural land or out so far in the suburbs that it puts a strain on existing school resources or road resources or water sewage resources. There's so many costs associated with sprawl in terms of climate. So, we're basically just trying to say that when possible. Now, obviously, if we're building a new project in Cumberland, there's not going to be a whole lot of transit-oriented development other than, I guess, the MARC station is there. I guess the better example would be like Hagerstown. You're not going to have a whole lot of transit adjacent area. So that's why the bill is pretty flexible with the language that where possible, we should be trying to put these places in sort of high density areas.
So you were not referring to density of the development itself, but just an area that has density.
Correct. Yeah, I'm agnostic, and the bill is agnostic on the kinds of housing that could be built. It could be garden apartments. It could be 3 stories. I think right now the sweet spot. The reason I said 6 stories is the sweet spot is to build these things with like timber construction. I'm sure Lori could talk more about that. But use timber, it's cheaper, and if you do like 6 stories, that's kind of the sweet spot for for number one, you don't want these like monstrosity buildings because that's no good, but you can kind of build a sort of cute, quaint 6-story building cheaply, and that's kind of the gold standard right now. So that's what I'm envisioning in my head. But once again, the key is county flexibility. We want this money to go to counties that have the best developed project, and we don't want to be too restrictive and specific about what their projects look like.
Thank you.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Clark, then Ruth, then Taraza, in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate, just 2 questions real quick. Thank you for bringing this bill up. That had been waiting for it. I figured you would put it back in after last year. But what the fee that you were alluding to earlier in your conversation is a possible revenue source. Would that fee be then conveyed to the state, or would it be held locally in the local jurisdiction?
Great question. So the surcharge that we're talking about is something that's collected and it would be sent. Right now, it's the surcharge that's taken on instruments is sent to a variety of places. Right under the bill, it would be sent to DHCD. It would then live in this existing fund called Partnership for Rental Housing. But that fund already exists. We're not changing this part of the program. Already exists to funnel that money to the counties. So it would start with a homeowner. It would go to the state. Counties would apply, and then the money would funnel back to the counties. Now, Bill Castelli, I think, is going to testify. He signed up unfavorable. My understanding is the realtors have actually now changed their position to favorable with amendment. So he probably will talk a little bit more about another funding source that we're considering. And that actually does emanate in the counties. So it would be sort of money that currently that flows to the county in some way. DHCD would take it, and then it would go back to the counties. But he can explain that a little bit more because it gets a little technical and it honestly goes a little bit over my head.
So would the ability to utilize these funds, would they be based on a competitive application? Because obviously earlier we were talking about building near transit or a high density or availability of jobs. When you get out in the rural area, you don't have transit. Mm-hmm. You don't really have overabundance of jobs that are easily walkable to even in our town centers. You're not going to have an abundance of jobs that would make these competitive.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's a great question. So it is a competitive system. It could be the case that it's not super competitive, that we're able to generate enough revenue where basically every project that comes in is funded. But we just don't know how much revenue will end up at. And we also don't know how many different applications that DHCD will get per year. So I don't know how competitive it will be. It may not be very competitive at all. But to your point, you're right that there are some pieces in there that say the DHCD should try to prioritize where possible projects near jobs and transit. And you're also right, as I mentioned, that that's just simply not going to be doable. And that's where we put that language in there about where possible. As you know, Delegate Clark, I am a proud former resident of Appalachia and spent all my formative years in rural Alabama. So I know that rural poverty and rural housing scarcity exists. I've seen it in my own eyes, even though now I live and represent Montgomery County. And so I was actually very purposeful when I crafted the bill to make sure that this would not discriminate against rural counties if they wanted to apply. Now, obviously, no county is going to be forced to build anything. But if, Calvert or St. Mary's or any of the shore counties or the counties in Western Maryland, if they wanted to put in an application, we tried to put the language in there so that the language about density and transit would not discriminate against them, because obviously transit is not possible. Where possible, it's not possible in those places. But if you want to talk, I know that you're on the subcommittee with me. I think this is probably going to Brooks subcommittee. I'm happy to talk to you about language if you think that we could, or maybe it's going to Delegate Holmes. Anyway, I'm happy to talk to you about amendments. No matter what subcommittee is going to, I'm happy to talk to you about amendments if you think we could do a better job at making sure that rural counties are not discriminated against.
Okay, that's great. And I have a bunch of questions, but with just one last one. How will this compete against projects where you have the housing department builds 20, 30, 40 unit complexes for disabled or senior or low income individuals, where the entity that's going to build it is using tax credits to help to fund them projects, out on the open market where they sell the tax credits off?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Lori and Bill could probably provide a much more highfalutin answer to that than me. But the answer, my take on the answer is it wouldn't have any effect. I mean, this really just increases the pool of available state resources. A lot of the tax credit programs you're talking about are federal tax credits that are used for housing for example, veterans or those with disabilities. This program will not affect that funding. But I think more importantly, we're increasing the size of the pie so much, and of course that, those programs are going to have more funding available to them as well. Because as I said, if the money can't be used for mixed income housing under the bill, it automatically flows into other state housing funds that currently finance those sorts of proposals. And there's also nothing in the bill that says you can't have a fully veteran, mixed income housing project or disabled housing project. So if Calvert County or St. Mary's wanted to put in a plan that's 100% mixed income veterans housing, that could be funded under the bill as well, along with federal. I mean, it's important to also point out, just on a technical basis, these state programs are never fully funding a project. It's always sort of gap funding, sort of last dollar funding. Each of these projects receive funding from a variety of different sources, but the more money we can provide from the state, it just increases the number of viable projects. And I don't know, Lori, I probably botched that, but certainly if Lori wants to weigh in.
It sounded good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ellen Clark.
Delegate Ruth, then Delegate Terraza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to follow up on Delegate Harrison's questions. Some counties like Baltimore County don't have public housing, but instead, work with incentives and things like that to encourage developers to build affordable housing. Would those counties be excluded from this?
No. The money flows to counties, but the counties could still use, partners to build the housing how they want.
Thank you.
Delegate Terraza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, just a quick follow-up on Delegate Ruth's question, but then I had a couple questions. That it would have to be it would have to stay publicly owned, though. I thought.
Yeah, the county would have to own. Yeah, so
Yeah.
the county would have to own it, but projects could be developed, with private partners.
Right.
And that often happens.
Okay, so a couple things also following up on Delegate Harrison's questions. You said something about under current law, 100% has to be affordable.
Yeah, so I mean, the general.
Say something about that, because that was not my understanding, and maybe that's about specific programs.
So I was sort of speaking generally about the various different trust funds that exist that Maryland has. Generally, that, for example, the Housing Trust Fund and the Partnership for Rental Housing go to projects where 100% of the units have to be below a certain, AMI.
Okay. Well, let me say this. I think this type is very important, but I am also concerned about the percentages. And I'm wondering if you have seen any of the research in terms of, I know there's a lot of research out there in terms of percentages and that would not be concentration of poverty.
The percentages that would have to be market, you mean?
Yeah.
I have read a lot of that research. This goes back to my sort of Goldilocks approach. What I'm trying to do here is try to create a percentage where we don't have concentration of poverty. We have a good mix of incomes. We're funding projects that are viable, but just need a few extra dollars to be made whole. But at the same time, we don't want to just be funding projects that are market, right? So we're obviously looking for something on that continuum. I use the percentages based on some research I've done and what some other jurisdictions have done in terms of the 75% under 70 or 70% under 75% AMI. But if I know you obviously have a lot of experience in this area, Delegate Terraza. I'm not wedded, as I said to Delegate Harrison, not wedded to those percentages. If it was the will of the committee and the subcommittee to tweak those in this direction or that direction, that's totally cool with me.
So that and I appreciate that, and I also have some of that research I'm happy to share. But I guess that leads me to the question, because I wouldn't want this fund, this really important fund, so I'm really glad you're doing this, to go to the market rate units. Would this fund necessarily have to fund the market rate units in the building, or could it be used to pay for the lower income or the moderate income units and not be used towards the market rate units?
My understanding is, just from an accounting perspective, the money is all sort of shared. So, how it would work is that, a project, let's say, to simplify it, a project that, let's say Howard County wanted to build cost $100, and they've gotten, federal financing here. They've been able to get some private dollars here. They want to build this great new project for veterans and teachers, right? But so a certain percentage will be market and a certain percentage will be affordable for people at certain incomes. They would just be looking for extra dollars from us for the entirety of the project. So I don't think that we can necessarily say, well, we're going to give you $5 of the $100, but you can only spend it towards the affordable units. You have, I guess we could, but it would just be, they would just move money around and there would be no really net effect. And Lori, I don't know if I botched that one as well, but.
Okay, and maybe we could talk about that offline, but the last question I had to do with Delegate Harrison's question about high density, because the way I was looking at the fiscal note, and they said a mixed income housing development must be, and had 1, 2, 3, 4. And one of them said must be developed at a high density relative to the county or municipal corporation in which the mixed income housing development is located.
Yeah, right. I think the point of that is that basically every county's average density is like a single family home neighborhood. And we're trying not to fund a project that is a single family neighborhood. We want it to be a multifamily housing project. I think that was the intent of that language. But if that gives the committee heartache, we can change that to something that's a little bit more on point. But the intent is just essentially saying that.
No, I hear you.
If the average density in the county is X, which is going to be not very dense, we obviously want this to be a multifamily housing project, which is inherently going to be, even if it's a garden style apartment, it's inherently going to be more dense than the county it's located in.
Well, I think this mixed income idea is a wonderful idea, and I'm happy to get with you offline. Thank you.
Cool. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Delegate Raza, if I could just ask Ms. Graff if I misstated anything and you want to weigh in.
Oh, thank you. No, I think you're right. Ms. Delegate Terraz's last comment, I think, is point on. One of the things we are very concerned about is focusing all of our resources towards towards the lower income. We really need to make sure we're getting in that mixed income area as well, because we have a housing affordability issue in the state. So I think that's one of the nice things about this particular project. And I'm sure Bill, when he gets on, he can elaborate as well. But I think everything you stated is correct.
Okay, we have a question from Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Stewart, I really like the idea of mixed income a lot, but my questions are about how have you looked at tweaking some of the other programs that already exist, such as, like, recently we passed the source of income so that you can't be discriminated against if the tenants get a subsidy that they could take in anywhere and they can rent anything with it. They can rent a single family home if they have a large family and they want to and still get the benefit of using a voucher of some kind. And I mean, the state could put more money into maybe its own voucher program or increasing the value of some of the federal vouchers. That's one example. Another example is enhancing the tax credits that already exist, or broadening their use so that they could be used for mixed development rather than just for low income. And both of those have a different way of financing them, and it also doesn't get the government into the business of being a landlord, and that concerns me.
Sure. So a few things. So first, we're not creating a new program. The Partnership for Rental Housing program has existed for decades in Maryland. So we actually are tweaking an existing program that exists. Maryland already spends money to construct new housing. This basically just says, let's do more of what we're doing. We've been successful, but let's increase the revenue.
But you want the state or the government to continue to own the property even after it's developed, right?
But that's what currently exists with the partnership program.
Okay.
Yeah, that's no different. And in terms of your points, I mean, I'm certainly very glad that we finally passed the Home Act. And I believe Delegate Learman has spoken before. I don't know if she has any legislation to this effect this session, but spoken before about increasing the amount that we spend on vouchers from a state perspective. I think that's a wonderful idea, but this housing affordability crisis, as Ms. Graff mentioned, is so acute and it's so deep that just one solution is not going to be the issue. And if you look at the housing needs assessment report that DHCD commissioned, and it came out just last week, it states very clearly that we need to do a range of different solutions if we're going to crack this. And part of the puzzle is the construction of new housing. So we're not going to be able to just subsidy our way out of this. It would be way too costly, for the state to spend to try to subsidize vouchers for every single person. And also, we think that these buildings can have a positive effect regardless of the subsidy issue, because we're going to be creating jobs with the construction. We're going to be boosting economic development in a lot of areas where they're built. And we're going to be creating a nice new home for thousands of people that, that they can really be proud of. So I think vouchers are a part of the solution, but I also think that this bill is part of the solution as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I see no further questions for the sponsor or the witnesses in favor of the bill. So let's go to Bill Castelli, who is signed up as unfavorable, but let's see where he is now. Bill, are you out there?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Good afternoon. Bill Castelli on behalf of the Maryland Realtors. And yes, we have changed our position to support with amendment. We're in discussions with the delegate about some other possible revenue sources. One of the points that we've tried to make to the delegate and others is that, there are probably, 8 different real estate taxes now. So part of what we're looking at is the fact that with rising assessments of real estate, there's almost $200 million every year that's going to fund, different activities. And there's a lot of real estate taxes right now that are dedicated toward very specific good programs, important programs. But taking a look at a combination of a lot of different things and taking a look at where some of our existing, real estate monies go as well. So we're happy to have those discussions. We agree that there is an undersupply. Freddie Mac did a study last spring showing that Maryland is the 11th highest housing deficit, and that's both for sale and rental properties of the states. So it's a problem, and we're looking for solutions like this that go to supply, because supply underlines, in fact, a lot of the issues that your committee's looked at, from a lot of the landlord tenant issues, a lot of it is related to that undersupply. So we think addressing the supply issue is very important.
Questions? Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 1090. Let's proceed to House Bill 1073. Delegate Bridges.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Barvey, and Vice Chair Stein, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. Once again, for the record, Delegate Tony Bridges here in support of House Bill 1073. This is the Passive Housing Pilot Program. So the purpose is really to assist nonprofit organizations to partner with high schools and other institutes of higher education to provide students with CTE or career technical educational opportunities through the renovation of residential properties to help them become passive houses. A passive home is an energy efficient home. So this is all about energy efficiency. Passive houses uses less energy and save homeowners up to 90% on their heating and their cooling costs. So the goal is really to create more affordable and energy efficient housing with low income homeowners in the community that those houses reside. So this program will ensure that any renovated property is utilized to provide affordable housing in the neighborhood that the property is located, while also making it a passive house. So the fund is going to cover the property acquisition costs, the renovation costs, as well as the administrative costs. And it's similar to a program that's actually in Prince George's County called FACTS, which is the Foundation for Applied Construction Technology for Students. They also support student-built housing projects where single-family houses are built for the general public. So the students are really trained and supervised by staff and responsible for the construction of the house. They do the carpentry work, the masonry, the plumbing, heating, electrical, and the air conditioning, which are all those CTE type activities that I was talking about. The program for passive housing is actually done in Baltimore City right now at Carver High School, which is a high school that has a number of CTE, those trades as well. I do have a video that I'd like to share as well with some of the folks who are on the call who are associated with the program. Let me.
Have you worked this out with Trish?
I thought I did, but it
Yeah,
looks like.
yes, he did. He should be able to share the screen now.
Okay.
Thank you.
1 minute left.
Hey, what are we looking at here? I don't.
Oh, are you able to hear it?
I'm not able to hear anything.
Oh, let me try this one more time then. Sorry about that. If you're not able to hear it this time, I'll just see if I can send it to everybody instead.
Maybe you can narrate it to us.
Let's see. Are you hearing it now?
No.
No.
Well,
I'll
just
tell you what.
you
What
give
I'll
us the
do-
play-by-play.
Yeah, the folks from Carver are actually here and can talk about the program in a lot more detail. So basically, it's the Passive House program is really a program that Carver has that they take students from Carver High School that are doing the trades, really help them have hands-on training in the trades by acquiring a property in the neighborhood. Most of the properties that you would see, especially across the street, not most, but some are really dilapidated. And so the idea is to take those folks that are learning all those carpentry type programs and have them do hands-on activities to rebuild those homes and to provide those homes, affordable homes for individuals in the community. And so again, it's a pilot project to be administered by the Department of Housing for the entire state, not just for Baltimore City or Prince George's County. And I do have members from the Carver team that were in the video that I'll make sure that I send out to everybody who are here to speak and can answer questions about the program as well. And I'm here to answer questions as well. But if you want, I could turn it over to the.
Yeah, before I do that though, Tony, I have to tell you something. My late father was a hospital architect for the Veterans Administration, and after the first oil crisis in 1973, he began a lonely campaign to try to introduce passive solar building methods into the Veteran Administration's hospital construction plan. And of course, they ignored that because governments generally don't like to do anything differently. But passive construction is kind of a lost art in a lot of ways. And so I'm very happy to see this bill before us. So let me recognize Michael Rosenband, Timmy Aziz, Sterling Hardy, who are all signed up. So we'll go with Michael first. Michael, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. In this pilot, we are attempting to transform a vacant house located directly across the street from Carver Vocational Technical High School. There are 15 houses across the street and 5 of them sit vacant. And we're doing this in collaboration with community, Carver faculty, students, the school city, Baltimore City Community College, MICA, and Coppin State, as well as South Baltimore Community Land Trust. And we're working to develop a passive house curriculum to train a new generation of vocational graduate students to provide new career pathways that sync for the growing need for environmentally adaptive construction, ensuring economic viability for students working in the workforce in this shifting climate. The benefits of passive house design, they respond to environmental resilience. It's 9% less carbon emissions, and utility costs are around 90% as well. And the uniqueness of this particular project, we're able to use passive house and building science and build it within existing houses, proving that marrying existing materials with cutting edge home performance engineering can provide a new future for older homes and in blighted communities. On behalf of the people involved in this journey, we thank Delegate Tony Bridges and his team for introducing this important legislation and this committee for the opportunity to speak in support of it today. I'd like to introduce Sterling Hardy, who is really the heart and soul of this project and whose initial idea it was to sort of recognize the need for practical work-based learning as a Carver student way back in 2012.
Hi, I'm Sterling Hardy. With this program, basically we came up with it as a pilot program to—
Excuse me, could you reset the timer to 2 minutes? Okay, go ahead, Sterling.
Hi, we came up with this program basically to bridge the education and workforce gap right now that we currently are facing. One of my issues were when I graduated Carver, because I graduated in Carver in 2012, was that once I tried to get into the workforce of my carpentry trade, no one wanted to hire me because I didn't have what they called hands-on experience and work experience. So basically, I could read a planogram, but they basically said that I couldn't cut a straight line. So what we're trying to do is actually train our workforce of the kids that actually go to these vocational schools and these trade schools to actually have work experience once they get out of the classrooms and they graduated, so they can go straight into the workforce. And not only by doing that, but also by redoing the communities around them. So you have a school that's right across the street and it's a couple of vacant homes are sitting right across the street. Why not use that trade to also give kids hands-on work experience and also make the community better? Also teaching every trade, not just the carpentry trade, not just the electrical trade. You know, we want to teach our business management trades also too, you know, for them to learn how to acquire the building, to appraise the building, to also learn how to put the building back on the market and everything. Our culinary art trades, you know, teach them how to do fundraising and cook and everything for our fundraisers. So it's not just a program just for a certain trade, it's for all the trades, for all the trade schools. We're trying to incorporate everyone into this program.
Thank you very much. Do we have Timmy Aziz? Timmy?
Yes, I've just unmuted myself.
Okay, terrific. Welcome to the committee, Timmy.
Thank you. Thank you. Delighted to hear the story about your father. The passive house design methodology actually derives from the passive solar methods and discoveries that took place in the 70s, and is kind of like updated and modernized. Just to give you a background, I myself am a registered architect, a certified passive house consultant, and a full-time member of faculty at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore at the Department of Architectural Design. And with students from Micah and Johns Hopkins, actually, I've studied various design scenarios of rehabilitating vacant row homes in Baltimore as affordable housing and studied the social and environmental impacts of energy efficient designs. It may seem counterintuitive that energy efficient building design, particularly passive house design, should be well suited for affordable housing. One seems to belong to the high-end construction market, the other to the cheapest. But in cities like New York City, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, this unlikely marriage is taking place, much to the benefit of the residents' financial and physical health, as well as the environment. The passive house design methodology, as we've heard, offers energy security, diminishing utility bills by up to 90%, but it also makes for a healthy home because it has constant, balanced, filtered fresh air. The elimination of asthma triggers like mold, VOCs is particularly relevant to Baltimore City, where children suffer more than 2 times the national rate of asthma incidence. Passive homes are highly sustainable, have outstanding longevity and resilience to the power grid and climate. Could I have just a little bit more time?
Well, if you could wrap up, I do have some questions that I know are going to happen. So maybe, but yeah, go ahead. I mean, just.
Okay, 30 seconds or so. The Passive House pilot program that we're developing is trying to bring these benefits to the residents of Greater Rosemont, but also teach the young students like Sterling to build for the future, okay? And provide them a better job prospect by giving them the hands-on training. And the affordable housing that we're seeking is permanent. That's why we're partnering with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust that will steward our finished projects into the future. So,
if you could begin to wrap up that, the committee would appreciate it.
So for all of these multiple positive impacts, I ask you to support Delegate Bridges HB 1073. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question for the sponsor and the witnesses from the Vice Chair, Dana Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate, I think this is a great idea, great bill. One question about the disposition of the house after it's been renovated. Maybe Mr. Aziz alluded to this. The school or organization that's the grant recipient, they wouldn't actually have to hold on to the home and be the property manager. I take it they could sell it to a housing trust and then reinvest the proceeds from that in doing this again, building another passive house? Yes.
Should I reply? Okay. That is very much the kind of understanding that we're developing with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. Their role is exactly to partner with the residents. The Community Land Trust actually continues to own the land, but not the house itself. So there's a permanent relationship that exists between the resident and the Community Land Trust, which allows the Community Land Trust to also support the residents who are generally low income. But it is home ownership, which would otherwise not be possible. This is permanent.
These are these townhomes or row houses, or what kind of properties are these?
They are mostly row homes. Our pilot project is we've already acquired a 2-story row home, and it's facing Carver.
Okay, Delegate Holmes has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize that this is not necessarily in a question format, but I used to be on the board of FACTS in Prince George's County that the delegate has referred to, where the student-built houses were built, et cetera. And I just want to put a little bit of meat on the bones. There were clients or developers would donate the land, the houses would be built, and then with all of the students participating in it, when the houses were sold, some of those funds were put back into the program so that you could regenerate some of these funds again. Very, very good program in Prince George's County. And isn't that, in terms of the question portion of this requirement, Mr. Chair, isn't that so, Delegate Bridges?
That is so, Delegate Holmes. I appreciate you bringing up the fact that you are very knowledgeable about facts by being a part of that board. You know, and looking up the information about that organization, I realized that they were very similar in what they're doing with what we're trying to do over in Carver and Baltimore City. And, you know, just expanding this to be statewide, I think would be a really good opportunity for some other jurisdictions to actually take part in making sure that students had some hands-on experience in some of the CTE programs that we have.
We have a question from Delegate Wyville. Will?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still not clear on the funds. I noticed the fiscal note was $1 million a year annually. So if you do sell this home, do the funds go back into the program, or what are you doing with the funds?
That's a good question, Delegate. It takes approximately $250,000 to do the whole process that Carver was talking about. And so what they would do, it's a grant opportunity that the state is actually doing, where they would actually have folks submit a grant application to receive the funds to actually do everything from the renovation of the property, the demolition, if demolition needs to occur, acquisition. And once that is actually done, The goal is to have those homes purchased by a homeowner for affordable home ownership. And again, this is a pilot project, and so the money would be used for those purposes, in order to acquire the properties. But the purchase of the property would really be done by whoever that nonprofit or organization is, to actually give the property back to the individual that's purchasing the home.
But the grant is going to be basically state taxpayer money, right? $1 million, but I'm still not clear, and I don't think you answered the question. So if I sell the house for $500,000, where does that $500,000 go? Does it go back to DHCD for future grants, or does it go to the high school, or who's it go to?
Oh, yep. My apologies. The goal is really to have this to go back to housing and community development, so that we can continue to offer these properties on an ongoing basis, in the future. And so it's a grant opportunity. However, the funds should go back to DHCD once everything is done, for future purchases.
I'm just trying to understand the fiscal note. So as properties are renovated and sold, money coming back in, it may not necessarily be $1 million a year fiscal note then. I would assume hopefully there's a little bit of a profit on the sale, and the fund would kind of replenish itself.
That is the hope, with this. And I don't know if Timmy or if you could speak to the process that you already have in place, because they do have a process.
Well, the process we're planning for involves something like a sales to the Community Land Trust. There will be substantial expenses with the program. The fact that we're constructing while instructing students, it's really not as time efficient as a normal construction. We're really using the house as a learning tool. And we want to teach the students next year. So it's cyclical. We will take whatever money we have and we'll go right into the next house and prepare it for the next batch of students.
Okay, thank you.
Is that, yeah.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Bridges, just to follow through on Delegate Weibel's question a minute ago, would it be a smart thing or even a feasible thing to where you set this up once you got your initial grant to buy a house and the project went from A to Z and was sold, and that the money would be fenced off into some type of a fund so that you could teach the students not just how to rebuild the house, but the financial part of it, to where they would take that money and flip to another house and use the money to have so much money to budget to buy another house and to fix it up, and do an ongoing thing like creating somewhat of a business plan to make it profitable so that it could develop into a yearly thing, or more than one house a year, or maybe two different schools. Yeah, would that make any sense?
Yeah,
So I can answer that question. Basically, what the project is, so once the house has been acquired and renovated and sold, the funds of that sale will actually go back into pilot the next program. So we are going to use the funds to go to the next project and to recuperate what we already spent. So basically, we're not just selling the property and just trying to make a profit for it. The funds are going to redo the funds. So just how he asked before, like basically every year we wouldn't be trying to get $1 million because some of them funds are going to be recuperated from the sale.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. And when you say that it would be a good learning tool to teach the kids not just the art of carpentry and the hands-on that you talked about earlier, but also the financial issues that go along with, for lack of a better word, house flipping, and as ways that you can have a career and do projects like that and make them actually do.
You don't want to just
Go ahead.
Correct. We don't want to just utilize the construction trade. So as I stated earlier, was that we also want to introduce this to our business management trades that we have in these schools. So the business management trades, the kids that are taking up the management trades, we want them to acquire the properties, sell the properties, use the funds that we got from the previous property, how much we need to budget out to acquire a new property and redo the process again.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's a great idea and a great project to try to achieve. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions for any of these witnesses? Well, seeing none, that concludes the public hearing for House Bill 1073. Thank you, Delegate Bridges. Let's go on to House Bill 1095, also Delegate Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This one is a little more, may have a little bit more conversation on this one. House Bill 1095, again, Delegate Tony Bridges for the record. House Bill 1095 is really about housing discrimination. So the intent of this bill was really to protect individuals who are purchasing homes from being discriminated against during the real estate process by removing a name being noted on the offer to the seller. This was brought to my attention by some real estate professionals who do this every day. I admit I am not a real estate professional, but they still see an issue with the protection of individuals as they're purchasing their home. We know that there are protections in place for sellers as well as buyers, but they really don't go far enough. Acts of discrimination still occur, as you'll hear from my panel. It's the policy of the state of Maryland to provide fair housing throughout the state to all its citizens, regardless of, our race, color, religion, marital status, gender identity, so forth and so on. However, we all know that names of individuals can reveal a person's culture, their ethnicity, their family, and it can lead to a person or families being discriminated because of their name when they go to purchase that property. Now, you can argue that discrimination based on an ethnic sounding name is a form of discriminatory treatment, but to prove that, it's really on the burden of the buyer to prove that the seller intended to discriminate. Studies show that, many studies show that name-based discrimination occur, and rejecting applicants based on their name is a form of unconscious bias. Without showing intent, a successful lawsuit could be problematic if the buyer feels that they've been discriminated against. If you can prove valid reasons for turning down a potential buyer, such as that she or he could not demonstrate the financial ability or wasn't willing to post a deposit, then the sellers are safe. But sellers can really reject higher offers without one of those reasons. And it is on the buyer to prove that it could have been because of the name. So when you judge a person based on their name and perceived background, whether consciously or unconsciously, both are just wrong. So we have the opportunity to make this right by removing a candidate's name to ensure that when you purchase a property or you're going to purchase a property, it's based on your ability to purchase, not your background based on your name. So I do have some real estate executives who are here who can answer more specific questions about the entire process that are part of my panel. And they can tell you how this has occurred over the years, even with the current protections that we have in place. And so this is really to get those protections in place to another level so that as individuals are putting in bids for properties, they cannot be discriminated based on an ethnic or culturally sounding name. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I also have panel real estate executives who do this on a daily basis who can offer their testimony and answer any questions as well.
Well, okay, why don't we go through your witnesses, the proponents, Kimberly Kepnes, Rodney Dodson, Julia Frazier, and I'm not going to attempt to properly pronounce the fourth individual's name because I know I will be butcher it. So let's go to Kimberly, Rodney, and Julia first, and then your fourth witness, and then we'll entertain questions. So Kimberly.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Barve, Vice Chair Stein, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I'm here to provide support for House Bill 1095 to propose to remove the requirement that a buyer's name must be included in our residential contract. A name is precious. It's a roadmap of who we are, from where we've come, who we hold dear, what is important, what has happened in our lives, and what we value. And with a little digging, we know that a name can reveal even more. Recognizing this fact is the first step to understanding the importance of House Bill 1095. It is the policy of the state of Maryland to provide for fair housing, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, familial status, national origin, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, or source of income. Given a name holds information which may support discriminatory decisions in housing, should we not consider holding in private the name to best protect their interests? And if this bill cannot reach enough in the name of fair housing, we need only consider the use of technology and how further it compromises our buyers' privacy, which may lead to more bias. House Bill 1095 promotes fair housing. We will continue to conduct business as we have. Realtors will continue to represent buyers. Buyers will continue to provide pre-qualification approvals and letters of ability to purchase. Sellers will continue to seek advice of their realtor representatives on price and terms, and fraud will still be illegal. House Bill 1095 simply removes the name of the buyer to support fair housing and privacy rights. We hope you'll consider this important initiative, and we look forward to working with each of you, our realtors and colleagues at Maryland Realtors and the Attorney General, to bring this initiative to protect the privacy of our buyers in the name of fair housing.
Thank you. Is Rodney Dotson out there? Rodney? No?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
Thank you, Chairman, for this opportunity. My name is Rodney Dotson. I am a realtor at Monument Sotheby's International Realty. I'm a Morgan State graduate, a lifelong resident of Baltimore City, and one of the original drafters of this bill. Today, we introduce House Bill 1095. The central premise of this bill is to ensure discrimination, whether implied or implicit, be protected against the real estate transactions, be protected in real estate transactions. It also will update current measures already in place by fair housing laws that govern our duties as realtors. Many of us believe that Maryland laid grounds for racial discrimination pertaining to real estate with the Baltimore City Council's passing of the Residential Segregation Bill of 1910. This was the first bill of its kind in the United States to apply government legislation to achieve systematic citywide separation. As the universe would have it, today we have an opportunity to enact a law that will be trailblazing in the continued fight for equality in housing. This is not just the Maryland issue, it's a nationwide issue. Currently in the state of Massachusetts, there is a pending case, Clinton Brown versus Hardwick, where the buyer's representative submitted a real estate contract to the Hardwicks, and upon receiving that contract, the Hardwicks asked the real estate professional, was the buyers that were submitting the contract, were they African American because of the first name of Ebony. In fact, and so on. So we have this is a current issue, and removing the name from the buyer contract will restore the practices of fair housing.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, Julia Martin-Frazier.
Unmute. Okay, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Barve, Vice Chairman Stein, and members of the committee. I am Julia Martin-Frazier. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of HB 1095 as a licensed Maryland realtor. The topic of fair housing and discrimination is of paramount importance in our industry. It is a topic of great emphasis in our licensing and continuing education. So I was greatly frustrated when faced with a situation of suspected discrimination to see firsthand how impossible it was to assure my buyer clients that this was not the case. Last October, my client submitted an offer on a house of their choosing. In speaking with the listing agent, I learned that our offer would be one of three. My client's offer, although we were told was the strongest, did not get accepted. When I asked the agent repeatedly why the seller chose what we had been told was a less favorable offer and no answer came, the silence was deafening. Armed with no answers, I had to deliver the news to my clients, Chukwu Ebuka Umuna, Chukwu Nanso Umuna, and Cynthia Torres Delgado, that although they came in stronger, another offer was chosen over theirs. I do not know what conversations occurred with the seller and their agent. What I do know is that my clients wanted and deserved a fair explanation, and I had none to give. Had my clients not been identified in their offer, I could have assured them at least there was no bias at work in the seller's choosing of a weaker overoffer theirs based on their names. In summary, I quote from the Greater Baltimore Board of Realtors website, quote, "To be silent is to be complicit. We recognize that we cannot solve a systemic problem overnight, but we are committed to making progress and to working with our elected leaders to create legislation addressing the end of this abuse and solving this systemic racism," unquote. I believe that HB 1095 presents such an opportunity. Please consider making this a reality for all buyers in the state of Maryland who deserve to enter the housing market on a fair and level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Umuna, welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee. We look forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I forgive you for not being able to pronounce my name. You don't have to blame me. You have to blame my parents for that. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to say greetings to everyone. And the point I have the statement prepared, but Julia, who was our realtor, has already laid out my experience. So I want to repeat that. So I'm just going to say I'm going to say what I felt about the experience we had going to buy this house and how emotionally taxing it was and how infuriating and upsetting in equal measure it was. And all I'm going to say to bring my voice here is to say that I think that, as Julia stated, that if our names had not been there, this would have been a totally different outcome. And when she told me to come out here to speak and made this offer, I said, I have to be here because our situation is already done. And I just want to lend my voice to make sure that nobody else ever experiences something like this again. And as I'm an immigrant myself, and I came to Maryland, and this is a lovely state, and I've read the history of this state, and I think that this bill provides a good opportunity for this state to be a leader in doing away with this sort of excuse that people use to discriminate. So that's the point I have to make, and I'm here in favor of this bill and hope it goes through.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, any questions for the sponsor or any of his witnesses? Well, I have a question, Tony. Oh no, wait, Delegate Ampry has a question. Let's go to Delegate Ampry first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you bringing this bill forward, Delegate Bridges. I know that discrimination in purchasing homes and home assessments is an issue that we're still trying to figure out in this country, and we know that barring access to African Americans and other minority groups of being able to buy homes and create family wealth is critical to having an opportunity in this country. So thank you for that. My question is more so on the lines of two questions. Are there any other states doing this already in some form or fashion? So we'll be the first. And then the second one is, and I haven't really even thought about this, but what are compelling reasons that someone can deny selling a house to someone at a better price, right? So I think of like stories I see on HGTV where, they got a better offer, but, someone's like, oh, my wife's pregnant. This is our second child. This is our forever home. This is the perfect home. And there's like this emotional component that the seller is willing to concede the extra $10,000. So, just trying to get an idea of what is a compelling reason as to why someone can, because I want to make sure that if something like this is passed, just thinking about other reasons someone can start formulating why they decide not to sell to a person because of their ethnicity or race.
Thanks, Delegate Amprey. It's interesting to know that you watch HGTV like that, first of all. Second of all, I think that this would, for us, be sort of the first in the country where we're doing something like this. And I do want to acknowledge that I have spoken with the Credit Union Association and Maryland Realtors, and, they understand the intent of this bill and the fact that, we're trying to put those extra protections in place so that things like this won't happen. And so I do want to at least give them credit, although they came in unfavorable for this bill. But for us, this would be, as far as I know, the first in the country where we'd be doing this. But I'll let one of the real estate professionals take on the second question as to why individuals would be denied, even if they had the higher bid. Maybe Julia or Kim.
Sure, I'd be happy to chime in, and I'm sure Kimberly would have some wise words as well. I think we have to be very careful as real estate professionals. We do run into these situations where sellers, we're human. We want, many of us, after we've owned a home for many years, to make sure that it's going, some to an owner that will care it and love for it like we did, right? So we, as real estate agents, when we have a seller and multiple offers come in, and they often might want to know, what would motivate me to sell to one party over another. So we have to be very careful, as Kimberly spelled out, these protected classes, that we don't break the law by allowing our clients to make the decisions based on anything that might violate, the rights of a protected class. So first and foremost, we can't go there at all, anytime. And beyond that, Kimberly, you might want to speak to a situation or two, or Rodney, where something other than a financial bottom line comes into play. I mean, there are various parts of an offer that we look at, how much money somebody's putting down, when a settlement date is, what kind of inspections they might want or not want, if they might be willing to waive an appraisal. There's all kinds of things that we look at that put together what a seller might consider the best offer. Okay. So, I think those are some ideas. Kimberly or Rodney, do you want to go ahead with that?
I think it's a great conversation, and it's a great question. And interestingly, Maryland Realtors, in its recent issue of the Realtor magazine, actually made a statement explaining the implications of circumstances where buyers will submit love letters. And in the industry, we call a love letter is a plea. It is an emotional plea on behalf of a buyer to try to find a way to make their offer appear a little better. And it's dangerous territory. And we had a call yesterday with Maryland Realtors, and it's very important I'd like to just read the quote from the Director of Legal Affairs for Maryland Realtors. And we think she's a champion for fair housing, in stating that fair housing laws are intended to eliminate discrimination and ensure that anyone who is qualified can purchase real estate. A love letter can trigger implicit bias, putting a seller in the position of preferring a buyer based on a feeling or something that the seller just likes about the buyer. Accepting an offer based on anything other than price, terms, and merits of the offer might violate fair housing law, and realtors should discourage the use and consideration of buyer love letters to reduce the risk of discrimination. And in that statement from the Director of Legal Affairs, the Director of Legal Affairs actually made the statement that realtors should refuse to provide those letters to their seller clients because it encourages the seller to consider other factors like the familial status of the family, other factors. And we know, as realtors in the industry, our clients are researching our buyers. They're giving information about those buyers. They're looking online, and that information is information that, implicit or otherwise, could put the seller in the position of jeopardizing themselves and making a fair housing violation. And as realtors responsible to protect the public, it includes our seller clients as well. And the initiative is intended to protect the sellers from making that fair housing violation, and to be sure that the decisions of housing have to do on price, terms, and merits of the offer, and not other feelings or factors that compromise buyers.
So one quick follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So I understand that, and that makes sense. And, you know, I'd love to live in a world where that could truly, really happen. And, you know, but what about and I guess this kind of plays to the idea of like reasons why someone could take a different offer. What about developers? So let's say a developer wants to buy a home or two, knock them down. So under this bill, you wouldn't know it's a company if you were going to sell your home to a company versus selling it to an individual? Or is that even like, how would that, so you wouldn't know that at all? So just thinking about, I don't know, if you're next to a school building and you want to make sure that there's, you know, the neighborhood stays as a neighborhood versus becoming, you know, a parking lot or a bar, you know, I don't know, whatever it could be. But, you know, is there anything in the law that would require that?
Could I respond to that?
Go ahead.
Sure, go ahead.
Greetings. Yes. I think what we want, you know, to happen, we don't want to recreate the wheel. In our real estate world, as residential realtors, our job is to bring a ready and willing and able financially fit buyer. That means a homeowner, in which we work with lenders, mortgage brokers. They pre-approve our buyers. That process is not going to change. We typically don't work with, we do work with investors, but they have to be vetted by lenders as well for the intent. So we're not recreating the wheel. It's not going to be, you know, a mass developers coming, knocking down things. We're talking specifically the name of the buyer.
And if I could add to that, I think it's a really great conversation, and it's a conversation that the Attorney General cautioned that it's important that while we're considering fair housing agenda and we're looking at the protection of our buyer consumers by their name and by other factors that can be discovered by research of their name, it's important to understand that fraud is still going to be illegal. And disclosure requirements for real estate licensees are still going to be required to be a part of a contract of sale. If someone is a real estate licensee, that's a required disclosure, or a relationship to a licensee is a required disclosure. There isn't anything in the bill, nor is there anything in, you know, by practical application that would limit or prohibit the seller from requesting information about a buyer's intent. If the seller were concerned about disclosure, about the intent of the purchaser, that certainly would be within, you know, even under circumstances today, straw buyers are illegal. We understand that if there's a question about a buyer's intent, the seller certainly has an opportunity to request what the intent is of the purchaser. And certainly this bill, you know, we can't stop fraud in the practice of real estate. What we're intending to do is to provide protections. And especially when realtors are involved, we're obligated by law to treat all the parties fairly. We're obligated to protect the public and not participate in misrepresentation or fraud of any kind. I hope that at least answers in part.
Yeah, thank you so much. That clarified a lot, and I'll let my colleagues jump in. I'm sure they have some good questions.
Okay. Next questions go to Delegate Boyce, Healy, and Clark in that order. Delegate Boyce.
I
think my question was answered with the thorough questioning of Delegate Ambry. But I do want to, my first thought was, and especially given Baltimore City's history of housing discrimination, has there been anything in the past that changed this process? In other words, has this something that we've always had? You'd have the name of the potential purchaser and their offer price, or was this something that was introduced at a point through the housing process? Just curious. And then I wanted to ask about the Maryland Realtors concern about a redundancy of process.
I think, and I'll just jump in and possibly answer. Rodney could follow up. I think if you're asking about, this initiative was started by our company as a result of an occurrence with Julia Martin Frazier and Buku. And, I think COVID really brought it to attention. It's like everything that's happening this year, it's like, why is it okay? And as realtors, it's really difficult. Realtors have an unusually difficult time complaining about other realtors. We have professional standards, we have a process with HUD, and we did, provide information about making a HUD complaint. And what happens is there's this idea of that we're not able to make a difference. And I think we decided as a company that we just couldn't stand by and continue to see, especially in a multiple offer situation, we have purchase contracts being presented, in 5 or 6 offers, and sellers making decisions that aren't based on price and term. And so there must be something that we can do as an organization, appealing to the state to say, let's be a leader nationally to erase redlining and give purchasers the opportunity that they might be denied in what we're seeing in the industry.
Yeah, I'll just follow up, Kim. Yeah, COVID really put things in a spotlight for us. This conversation, light bulbs just went off after a broker meeting when we heard Julia's situation, and we just figured, like, how can we help? This is, in my opinion, is the most important piece of real estate legislation since the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So that's 53 years. When we think about it, like, what can we do? We can do all things. All things that's fair, and this is a bill that certainly tips on that. We're not, as again stated, trying to create the wheel. Delegate Boyce, so to answer your question, through research, we do not believe that this has ever been done. And also, in my 7 years as a professional real estate agent, there has always been the names on the contract. And to reassert Kimberly's point, yes, as an African American, you do feel defeated when you lose out on an offer. And sometimes in more segregated spaces in our state, I've had buyers ask me, what did I do wrong? They may have seen the seller outside and they saw us coming out. What did I do wrong? And a lot of times, to go through the process of getting a lawyer, fighting it with the current standards that we have in place, it's just defeating. It takes a win. They'll say, no, let's just go to another house. As realtors, that's not really what we stand for. We are here to advocate for our buyers the best way possible.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I just want to quickly, because I know other people, the questions are mounting. So I just want to see if you can respond to the Maryland Realtors their objection is they said the process the bill lays out runs counter to the current process of offer and acceptance. Because the buyer does not actually sign the contract, the seller is not agreeing to a contract offer, but to a proposal. The seller would then sign the proposal, which then becomes the offer, which the buyer may accept or reject. While some may ask what harm can result from flipping to the offer and acceptance process, we believe that some buyers would use the process to make offers on multiple properties at the same time, potentially tying up properties from accepting other bona fide offers. So I just wanted to hear your response to that, please.
And, thank you for bringing that up. We had a call yesterday with Maryland Realtors. We were very happy to have Mr. Castelli and the attorneys on the call. And we were happy to be able to clarify that the presumption that removing the buyer's name meant that there wouldn't be a signed offer is false. And we absolutely intend for nothing to change in the offer process. The buyer would meet with their realtor. They would create an offer based on the market analysis and the best terms possible and conversations with the listing agent. And the buyer would sign the contract, either a wet signature or electronic signature. We have multiple platforms for electronic signings. So we were able to clarify that with Maryland Realtors, and working on that platform of, is that simply a removal of the name, or is that adding an ID number? We do sign contracts electronically now. That is a common part of our industry and a technology advance that there can be electronic digital signing numbers. There are lenders that have loan numbers. There are a variety of ways, and we look forward to working with this committee and to creating a commission that can study the best way to make this actionable. And I think it's important to also recognize, it might answer another question, that this initiative is helping to protect implicit bias. Because this summer we did have the National Association of Realtors who came out with a study from the Perception Institute about implicit bias. It came out in July. And that implicit bias was a great education for us to think about the things that we do unknowingly, unconsciously. And this is the first initiative that—
Well, excuse me, but I think you answered the question.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Let's just move on to Delegate Boyce. Does that answer your question? Great. Delegate Healy, Clark, and Stewart in that order.
Thank you very much. My questions are along the same line. Several of my questions have been answered, so I'm just going to focus on a couple things. This idea of something other than price or other things to be considered that you would still want, or maybe not. I mean, if you want to make it that narrow, that's fine. But I want to understand. If a person is selling their house and they want to make sure, like you've said, that the new buyer is going to care for their home that they've lived in for a long time. They might want somebody who is going to commit to, or at least say that they're going to commit to living in the home and not just treating it as an investment and renting it out on an ongoing, especially like in college towns and so forth. Can you respond to that one first?
Well, I can say developers aren't protected classes. So if a seller wanted to reject an offer because that person didn't intend to retain the home or was going to change it in some way, that wouldn't be a protected class.
Well, you're talking about a developer, but I'm talking about an investor, somebody who wants to buy a house and rent it out to college students. I mean, lots of people living near the University of Maryland, for example, might not want to live next to a house full of college students. And
that would not be a protected class as the classes stand today. So there would not be a protection for the seller who would deny that owner or that purchaser a contract, would not agree to a contract based on understanding that was their intent.
Okay. The other one I think might get closer to this bill, and that is if the person who wants to purchase the property is a notorious criminal, that has done mass murder or, axe murders or something outrageous, and a name that's well known in the community. They would be able to shield who they are and buy a piece of property.
Mhm.
What's your response to that?
Well, I can say, I think there's even a House bill right now on the floor that's considering criminal activity. I know that if there are disclosures required for someone who is a sexual offender, that has to be a disclosure. So that would be a separate kind of disclosure that would be obligated, and the realtor wouldn't be able to mask that. I think that would be a great question for Maryland realtors to answer in our present environment about there's no protection for denying housing for someone for that history.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
May I add just a little tag to that very briefly?
Sure.
Thank you. I would also just say that the intent of this bill, is not to speak to very unusual situations such as you described that are valid, but far more unusual than I think what we see as a possibility of happening far more often, in terms of, judgment and just inappropriate situations and discrimination. And so for me, the fact that, as I briefly mentioned before, that we are so taught to believe, and it's ingrained in our licensing and education to protect these classes, when I was confronted with it, I was shocked to find that I had zero tools to do anything about it. And I went to Kimberly and I went to my broker and I said, this is going on right now. This is fair housing. This is it. All we've talked about our whole career. This is it. What do I do? And they said, in the moment, I really can't tell you any tools. So for me, this is, we can file complaints and we will, and we can go forward with those things, but this is something concrete that as a realtor, I haven't seen anything like, that we can use in a real life situation to help us. That would actually be a very practical thing that could just write off a very simple, obvious possible means of discrimination. Thank you.
Okay. Next question goes to Delegate Clark, and I'm going to ask the witnesses to answer the question. Just answer the question, please, if that's possible. Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate, this is for you or any of your panel. So am I correct in understanding, so there would be no buyer's name on any real estate contract anymore? With this legislation? Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Delegate Clark, this is once you get to the point where the buyer and the seller are, in negotiations, the seller would not be, the buyer would not be able to see the name on that contract. Now I get it. There are processes underneath of that where, you got to go to the banks and, be pre-approved and all that, where the names would actually have to be there for banks and all your approvals. But once you get to the point of the process where the buyer and the seller have to negotiate on who's getting that property, the names should be removed at that point.
Delegate Clark, let me just interrupt for a moment to expand upon you, and then I'll give the floor back to you. Delegate Bridges, so at what point in the process, so Kumar Barve wants to buy a home from Tony Bridges. At what point in the process will Tony Bridges or his real estate agent know that the name of this prospective purchaser is Kumar Barve? At what point under your bill?
Yep, under this bill, the buyer wouldn't know until the contract is actually approved. And so
you mean the seller?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the seller wouldn't know until the contract is actually approved. So in the process, there's you remove the names and it becomes client A. If there's a client B or a second person on the that would have to go on the title, it'll be client B. And then, after the approvals were all done, you signed off on it as client A, client B, then the names would be divulged at that point.
So if Jerry Clark is my real estate agent, he would make an offer to you for $500,000 from client A, but he would make present a package to you as the seller that says client A has secured financing for $500,000. Client A is whatever the other conditions are. And then you would just be presented with client A, $500,000 of financing, and you choose between A, B, C, or D. Is that
Correct.
what Kent is? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Delegate Clark, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. You just made me think of another question, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow on the chairman's line of questioning there for a minute. So if you do it that way and there's no name represented from the buyer, and we get through the offer point and both sign the offer, it is my mindset that there would be more liability on the real estate agent and the broker if there was a problem with the buyer, if the buyer misrepresented itself or misrepresented the ability to borrow the money. Would that give the seller of the home the ability to go after liability to the real estate agent in the brokerage house or the brokerage?
Yeah, I think all the things still stay the same. And so it's as if you actually have the name on there anyway, right? And so if you were not able to do everything that you claimed that you were going to do in the first place, but you actually had Tony Bridges on there, then you're liable. Your liability is just the same as having client A on there, whether you're talking about the real estate agent being liable or the person that's purchasing the property.
Yeah, but my question is, the agent is bringing me, for lack of a better word, a straw buyer, which I have no name for. It could be a number. And they're representing to me that all A, B, C, D, E, F, and G is all in line, and this person's free qualified and all this stuff. And I sign it as a seller. And it turns out that it's not. Wouldn't the agent and the broker of that agent assume some liability that otherwise they don't now?
I'd like to answer that question. I think that if the agent participated in a misrepresentation, then it's, of course, just as today, if an agent participates in a misrepresentation, the agent could be held accountable as well as the brokerage. And that's similar as it would exist today. If the buyer has never seen the property, there's a required disclosure. It's called a sight unseen addendum. And so I can appreciate the question, thinking, is this offer coming from someone who's never been in the house? And is the realtor colluding to misrepresent this buyer? And those, of course, as we said, we can't, fraud is we can't root out fraud with this measure, but this measure is certainly not intended to perpetuate fraud.
Okay, thank you. Two other quick questions. How will this affect owner finance deals, and how will it affect online sales with online realty companies, and the ability for a seller to be able to participate in either one of them two types of transactions?
Somebody want to take that? I'm happy to, but I'll wait.
I think you're doing a good job, Cam.
I think that the intent of this bill is that the seller, and I think I forgot your first question. I'm so sorry.
Owner financing.
So the intention is that, as it's customary today, a buyer is looking at a property with a real estate agent, and that buyer will need to have credentials, and those credentials will need to be provided to the seller client to support whether the seller is willing to consider the credit status of that consumer. So I think in an instance such as you're suggesting, the seller's agent or the seller or him or herself would need additional information provided by way of a credit report. And, of course, I wouldn't expect any owner financing purchase proposal to proceed without vetting that buyer as a conventional offer would.
Yeah, but if I'm a owner financial, why would I enter into any legal contract without knowing who the person was and having their financial framework in front of me before I sign the contract to start with?
Well, and you have every right to request that information. And so the buyer could provide a social security number, they could provide a credit report, they could provide, and you're certainly within your right as a seller to request documentation that supports your ability to make a decision on that offer.
Okay, and how would it affect the ability to do online sales?
I don't think it affects the ability for online sales. I think the question is in the state of, we're talking about the state of Maryland today. I think any seller client that is represented or any seller client that is unrepresented needs to be able to satisfy the credentials, the identity of the buyer, the qualification of the buyer, which have customarily been done by the lender. As an ordinary course of practice of real estate, realtors do not verify identity of consumer buyers. We meet buyers, we take them at their word of who they are, we show properties, we enter into contracts, and then they provide us with lender credentials that verify their financial capacity. And so I think that what happens with an online purchase is that the concern over someone not having seen a property potentially, those are complications that have less to do with who the purchaser is and has the buyer effectively qualified the property.
Yeah, one last question, and I promise, Mr. Chairman. When you say that you don't participate in the qualifications of a buyer financially, isn't it true that most big brokers nowadays, or even small brokers, have preferred lenders that they use that are either financially involved with the brokerage house, or could be just some type of a subsidiary that would cause you to have to be more involved in the qualification of the person?
You're correct. What I intended to mean is the realtor personally isn't a loan officer, but they would be relying on a third party, even if they were related to the brokerage.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
before I recognize Delegate Stewart, so Kumar Barve is the prospective purchaser. Tony Bridges is the seller. Tony Bridges wants a credit report for Kumar Barve. So how does this happen? My real estate agent runs a credit report, pulls my name off of it. It only has my social security number on there. And then I give my social security number without my name to Tony Bridges. I mean, typically, I would rather a person see my name than my social security number, but I haven't been involved in a purchase recently. So would Tony Bridges know my social security number, but not my name? How does that work?
Chairman Barve, all respect, in my years in real estate, there has never been a transfer of a credit report between a buyer and a seller. I believe that's
Wouldn't there
really.
Wouldn't there be now?
No, we would still act upon the rules and laws that guide us. We lenders are the gatekeepers, if you will, to our buyers' personal and financial information. They supply our buyers, they prepare our buyers to become financially able to buy homes. When I personally meet with buyers, I tell them, I am not a link to any of your personal financial information. So to your question, that would not happen. And if you as a seller would want to see a buyer's credit report, that's I would inform my buyer against that. The pre-approval serves as notice your capability, of my buyer's capability to buy your property.
I guess it's been a long time since I bought property, so I just don't remember, but
Problem.
okay, Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick. Thank you all for all coming. Delegate Bridges, as always, it's great to see you. I really appreciate the intent of this bill. I mean, anything we can do to reduce the amount of racial or ethnic prejudice in the real estate process seems a good idea to me. I just have two quick questions. One, and to anyone on the panel. One, it's been a while since I took contracts, 1 year of law school, but my understanding was that you always, I understand maybe not having a name on like a bid or an offer, but to not have a name of a party on a contract, is that still legally enforceable? My understanding,
I guess it will be if we pass the law.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's as we're talking with Maryland Realtors, the intent is not for there to be no buyer's name. The intent is for the buyer's name to be hidden, and that you have someone who has signed a contract of sale and has made the representation that's what in the contract of sale is true and accurate. And so I don't believe, and that is a question for Maryland Realtors. We've not been suggested by Maryland Realtors or the Attorney General that those are concerns with the intent of how we had planned this initiative to come forward.
Okay, and then my second question is just related. I think it's been referenced again, but I don't think you'll answer this question. But the AG letter of concern was referenced, and in that letter, it references a potential amendment for the committee, which is the AG's office is suggesting that we limit the bill to limit the ability of a purchaser to remain anonymous to merely individual purchasers who intend to make the single family property their personal and primary residence. It seems like that would comport with the bill's intent from what I gather, which is about racial animus. Would y'all be open to that sort of thing? In other words, you can't shield entity names. It would have to be individual shielding.
Yes.
Yeah, Delegate Stewart, we definitely would be, and again, I think all the individuals, all the organizations that submitted, their amendments or unfavorables, we all understand the intent, and I think we are willing to work on amendments to ensure that folks do, don't get discriminated in this process.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, the last question to the proponents is going to come from Delegate Jalisi, and then we're going to move to the opponents. Delegate Jalisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question was more of what I see in real estate contracts more often, which is when somebody accepts, when you submit a contract or before the owner or the seller accepts the contract, they also ask for a pre-approval letter from the bank. And so you can change the name or hide the name on the contract itself, but unless you also include the lenders from changing the name or hiding the name on the pre-approval letter, it just defeats the purpose, I think. And I totally understand why we need it, because it's to prevent discrimination. But I think that then you would have to, in my opinion, and the sponsor can correct me, you would also have to pass a law to require the lenders from not putting the buyer's name on the pre-approval letter, because in my opinion, you cannot force a seller not to demand a pre-approval letter to know whether the buyer can actually close the deal. Isn't that right? Yeah.
Yes. Oh. Yeah, I would absolutely, Delegate Jasili. In discussions, the lender is very important in this law, in collaboration with a forum that we could create to really iron out every possible scenario. The lender is paramount in doing that. Most lenders now do send over a loan number that is associated with that person's pre-approval. One suggestion could be that number could be on the name section of the contract. I don't know, but that, yes, and to answer your question, the lenders are very important.
And then the second thing is about 70% of these home loans come from the federal government, whether it's FHA or Fannie Mae or some other federally backed mortgages. So how do you require the federal government from doing what we are doing as a state assembly? That should be this. I mean, I think that should be our second consideration. Don't you think?
And thank you, Delia. I think, you know, the one thing that I feel, especially with this, is we can only do what we're able to do here at the state level at this point. And so, you know, that's why this was brought to the attention of the Maryland General Assembly to see just what we can do as a state, at least.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Nod.
Okay, we're going to move on to the opponents of the bill, and they are Rory Murray, Lori Graff, and Bill Castelli. So Rory, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yep, and I can see you.
Hey, folks. Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the committee, Rory Murray, here on behalf of the Maryland DC Credit Union Association. I hesitate to say we're opposed to the bill. We 100% support the intent of the bill. The language is drafted. I'm not sure that it gets to the intent of the sponsor, and it definitely raises a lot of legal questions. We heard multiple times from the first panel that during the bid and offer phase, bid and offer, but the language of the bill itself says residential contract of sale. Under basic tenets of contract law, going back to, so going to the first point, if the state wants to strip all non-statistical, money related information or what have you from the bid and offer disclosure process, we're agnostic on that issue. That's outside of my purview. But when it comes to the actual contracts, contracts are mutual obligations enforceable by law. They must identify a buyer against who the contract can be enforced. And with Maryland law specifically, real estate brokers and agents are only allowed to engage in ministerial acts on behalf of their clients. They cannot sign a contract on behalf of client A, which puts the liability of the contract on them, as the bill states, and then have a separate document, which is a contract between them and the buyer to have the identity of the buyer. Under Maryland law, they can't do it. There's plenty of ways that somebody can remain anonymous already to purchase real estate. They can do it through a nominee, which technically, if brokers were allowed to do more than ministerial acts, they could act as nominees, but here they can't. I got more things to say, but I'm out of time. Anyway, we oppose. There's a lot of issues.
I suspect there'll be questions. Lori Graff is next.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Lori Graff again, CEO of the Maryland Building Industry Association. I'm here to testify on this bill. And we as well agree with the concept of the bill. We understand the problem that is presented by the bill, but we had a lot of the concerns that were already mentioned and a lot of the questions, mostly about how logistically this is going to work. And also we interpret the bill to not be all contracts, but it would be on the request of the buyer. And that is stated in the bill. So our concern is some unintended consequences. You may have a bidding war. We just talked earlier on a bill about lack of supply. You may have a lot of different factors. And the concern may be client A is bidding against Joe Smith, and you don't know who client A is, but you do know who Joe Smith is, and there could be some unintended consequences. So we just want to make sure we know what we're doing when we pass legislation like this. We're not messing up other pieces of things, and we're really looking at all of the unintended consequences. I have had conversations with the realtors, and we obviously share a lot of the concerns that they have that have already been discussed a little bit. And I know that Bill will be testifying to that point as well. So with that, we're happy to have the conversation further. And we just have a lot of concerns about logistically how this would work with the contracts and those types of things. So with that, currently we are opposed to this bill, but certainly want to be a part of the conversation to see if we can come up with a solution. So thank you.
Okay, and Bill Castelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and I want to thank Delegate Bridges and the advocates who brought the bill today for having those conversations with us prior to the hearing. We do share, and I think what you've heard from the opponents, including us, is I don't think anybody's opposed to the why. I think we're opposed to the how, or at least uncertain about the how. And one of the conversations that we've had with some of the proponents really goes to that fact, because as other parties have said, for an enforceable contract, you need a signature. And one of the conversations we had with them was, this might be more of a technological solution in order to make this happen, which is we know that there are platforms out there that you can use where you would be able to essentially mask a signature or the identity of a buyer and then have it revealed at some point so that it is an enforceable contract because it is actually the electronic signature of a buyer. But it's not really, when we discussed it with our own members, we weren't really clear of what that technology is right now, how we would be using it. So we do think that, this is a problem, and we certainly support efforts to try and figure out what makes the most sense in terms of moving forward and trying to address it. And would love to continue our conversations with the advocates to make that happen.
Okay, questions? Are we all talked out on this? What's going on? Well, it appears that there are no questions for the opponents, but lots of opportunities for both sides to talk amongst themselves to arrive at a solution. So, okay, well, thank you, Delegate Bridges. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 1095. Let's go to the first of three bills by Delegate Conaway. First, House Bill 1201. Delegate Conaway, are you in the House?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee, for seeing me today. It's House Bill 1201. I'm here to present this to you. I'm Delegate Conaway. I have some information that's coming to you. We're trying to get it out the office right now. The first thing I want you to know is that there was a little drafting error, and House Bill 1201 should relate to commercial properties. I have the amendment here. I didn't know if you want me to read you the number or you'll get it. It'll be fine, whatever you say.
We'll get it. Just tell us what your intent is with the bill.
All the bill does, it says if you have a lease, and in the lease you have a commercial lease, and in the commercial lease it says that you're responsible for the HVAC system, you'll have a separate place to initial that notice of responsibility in the lease. That's all it says.
Okay.
Answer any questions?
Well, hold on. Let's see if there's anybody. It doesn't appear that anybody signed up to testify in favor of the bill. So, any questions for the sponsor on this bill? All right, we'll go to the opponents. The opponents are Zafar Shah and I guess Greg Countess with Legal Aid. So Zafar, are you with us?
I'm here, Chairman.
What say you?
Thank you, Chairman Barbay, Vice Chair Stein, members of the committee. Zafar Shah from the Human Right to Housing Project at the Public Justice Center. Of course, you've heard for several years, Public Justice Center has advocated for stronger protections for tenants who face substandard conditions in their properties. We advise and provide legal representation to hundreds of Maryland renters. And one situation we often encounter is that tenants whose heating or cooling system has failed are asked to essentially take on the cost of the repair by the landlord. So in order to get a feature, essential service of their rental property, they have to incur the cost of maintaining it. This bill we oppose because it essentially doesn't require tenants to take on that burden unfairly, but it provides the legal imprimatur, if you will, of this type of practice. In our analysis, contracts that require tenants to take on the maintenance and repair cost for a critical appliance such as an HVAC are in violation of code enforcement provisions throughout the state in different parts of the state. This goes specifically to heat, and we've identified, for instance, in Baltimore City's property maintenance code and Montgomery County's code of regulations, that clearly it is not permissible to put the replacement or repair responsibility for these types of appliances on the tenants. And I'll just leave it at that. This is I don't know what the good intention is of this bill, except maybe to put the onus for filter changes and what have you on tenants. But certainly these costs can be prohibitive. And at the end of the day, if a tenant can't afford to pay for the repair, they're going to go without heat. And that's, as a matter of public policy, we think anathema to the warranty of habitability, the rent escrow law that we have in this state. And I'll conclude there. We oppose, we seek an unfavorable report on this bill.
Okay, anybody here from Maryland Legal Aid?
Yes, Your Honor. Excuse me, Your Honor. I'm so used to being in court. Forgive me,
Sort
Chairman
of honorable.
Barbay. Yes, you are, sir.
Please, sort of.
No, not sort of. You are. And Mr. Vice Chair Stein and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. And I'm going to curtail my testimony in light of the sponsors of the bill's assertion that this would only apply to commercial properties because the gist of my comments, as well as I believe Mr. Shaw's comments, go to residential properties, and my comments also go to the fact that this would completely gut, or not completely, but substantially gut the protections that are embedded in the rent escrow law, known as which is Maryland Real Property Code 8-211, as it applies to residential tenants, because, and the statute says, it's that the statute is set out to be an effective mechanism establishing for the repairs of conditions and halting their creation and placing responsibility for in a lease with the affordable housing crisis that you heard us talk about earlier and throughout the session, as well as many sessions in the past. This is going to exacerbate those problems as it, in reference to residential and so tenants. So if it's going to be amended and it's only going to apply to commercial, then we have no further comment on that. And so thank you.
Okay, any questions? Delegate Jalisi?
I think that Mr. Countess just answered my question that if this was just limited to commercial property, then there wouldn't be any objection.
Okay.
My understanding from the beginning, from what I could understand from the sponsor, was it was limited to commercial property. But either way, my question was answered.
Okay. Any other questions for the opponents to the bill? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 1201. Let's proceed to House Bill 1218. Delegate Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Committee. This is Delegate Conaway here to give you House Bill 1218, you say? And
yeah, 1218, that's correct.
The 1218 has to do with the estoppel notice by the landlord. And if what it says, if you have to give your landlord an estoppel, then he has to send you a copy of that in a certain number of days. And all of this came out of, again, a lease agreement that I became aware of that has this estoppel information in it. So the question was, how is the estoppel generally used? It's generally used, well, I'm quite sure you all know, but it's generally used by the landlord who might take the property to a bank to get financing, but it wants to have a guarantee that the tenant is going to stay there. But what I've also found out is that the landlord can potentially add things to the estoppel that the tenant used to upgrade the property, and thereby, according to what I had in this lease, thereby can claim those as being part of their assets. So, and I had a opinion from the Attorney General. Well, I think that might be my next one, but it's in reference to an email and how you would be getting this. And emails are not legal in the state of Maryland, so you would have to also get a hard copy. And with that, I'll be glad to try to answer any questions if you have.
Okay, no one is signed up to orally testify against the bill, but there's one person signed up favorable with amendments for written, and 3 people signed up unfavorable written. So are there any questions for the sponsor of the bill? No. All righty then. Thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 1218, and we will proceed then to Delegate Conway's final bill today, House Bill 1220.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, committee, for hearing me. I'm Delegate Conway here in reference to House Bill 1220, and this has to do again with the lease. It has to deal with email notification, and some landlords now might believe that they can give you a notice of not renewing your lease by email. But I have this letter that I'm sending you a copy of from the Attorney General that says the email notification is not legal in the state of Maryland. So therefore, I'm requiring that they send you out a certified copy within 5 days after the email. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Well, we do have Zafar Shah, who signed up favorable with amendments. Zafar, let's hear from you, and then we'll entertain questions of, and then there's, actually, you're the only 2 signed up to testify. So let's hear from you, and then we'll entertain questions.
I thank you, Chairman Barve, and members of the committee. Again, for the record, Zafar Shah from Public Justice Center. So this bill raises an important, an increasingly important issue, which Delegate Conaway addressed, which is notification by electronic means. And we're favorable on this bill with amendment to address a couple points. So one is simply that these electronic notifications do occur by email, but also by other electronic means, for instance, by text message, and even through apps like the Rent Cafe app or their portal websites, where communications are made to tenants on a sort of a cloud-based mechanism. We think this bill could address all types of electronic communications for cancellation or non-renewal or renewal of a lease. Some leases do specify the type of delivery method for this type of notice. And so whereas some statutes where this comes up are silent on the type of method of delivery for a notice of non-renewal, some leases do specify that it has to be mailed. We don't want this bill to override those lease terms, which I think we would all consider that a mailing might be more valuable to a tenant, more helpful in some situations than the electronic one. Thirdly, the 5-day follow-up in this bill to the electronic notification. So where the mailing is going out, we think that could be more effective if it were a 2-day follow-up period rather than 5. In the instance where the mailed notice, the electronic notice isn't effective, then with the follow-up 2 days later, within 2 days with the mailing, the tenant is getting more effective notice. For instance, in a 30-day notice period, they'll get they'll get additional time compared to if they lost 5 days under this bill. So those are our amendments, and we urge a favorable with amendments report.
Okay. Any questions for the sponsor or Mr. Shah? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
And it appears that there's the opponents are all written, so there are no further witnesses for this bill. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 1220, and it ends the public hearings for this afternoon. Announcements. Any subcommittee chairs with any announcements first?
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Gilchrist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Agriculture Subcommittee will meet in 10 minutes at 4:40.
Okay. Any other announcements from subcommittee chairs? Delegate Holmes, and then the vice chair.
Housing and Real Property meets tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Okay. Dana.
Thank you. The Environment Subcommittee will meet tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Okay. Any other subcommittee chairs with announcements? Okay, seeing none. Any other members of the committee who would like to make an announcement? Okay, in that case, try to behave yourselves. Have a nice evening and see you tomorrow.